When people ask about the meaning of life, they're often met with two types of answers. Those that point to something concrete, family, happiness, service to others, and those that suggest there may be no inherent meaning at all. The question itself has haunted philosophers, theologians, and ordinary people throughout human history. What if the meaning of life isn't something to be discovered like buried treasure, but rather something we create for ourselves in the everyday moments that make up our existence? Some philosophers argue that life's meaning comes from the outside, perhaps assigned by a divine creator or woven into the fabric of reality itself. Others, like existentialists such as Camus, suggest that we exist in a different universe where we must construct our own meaning. You might find yourself agreeing with Nietzsche, who proposed that meaning comes from overcoming challenges and creating something beyond yourself, or with the Buddhist perspective that emphasizes being present and reducing suffering. The search for meaning often intensifies during periods of personal crisis or when confronting our mortality. We look at the vastness of our cosmos and the billions of years that came before us and the billions that will follow after we're gone, and wonder if anything we do truly even matters. Yet, paradoxically, it's often in recognizing our cosmic insignificance that we find the freedom to determine what makes our brief time here meaningful. Perhaps the question itself, this persistent human yearning to make sense of our existence, is itself part of what gives life its depth and texture. Nostalgia wraps around us like a comfortable blanket, offering temporary shelter from the harsh realities of the present. That bittersweet longing for times past just isn't about remembering, it's about yearning for something fundamentally unreachable. When we slip into nostalgic reverie, we're not actually accessing the past as it was, but rather constructing an idealized version stripped of its complications and disappointments. You might notice how nostalgia intensifies during periods of uncertainty or transition. This isn't coincidental. Our minds instinctively reach backward when forward momentum feels threatening. Psychologists have found that nostalgic reminiscence can temporarily boost feelings of meaning and social connectedness, serving as an emotional regulator of sorts. But there is a darker aspect lurking beneath. The more we romanticize what's behind us, the more alienated we become from our present circumstances. What makes nostalgia truly unsettling is its connection to our sense of personal continuity. Those cherished memories form the scaffolding of who we believe ourselves to be, yet they're fundamentally unreliable, colored by emotion, reshaped with each retrieval, and ultimately more fiction than fact. When we recognize this, we're forced to confront the disturbing possibility that our sense of self rests upon a foundation of beautiful illusions rather than objective reality. Another disquieting aspect is how nostalgia has been weaponized at societal scales. Political movements promising returns to better times exploit collective nostalgia for eras that never truly existed as remembered. We find ourselves longing for the golden age that, examined closely, reveal themselves as selective memories polished to a high shine, their imperfections carefully edited out. Is your nostalgia truly your own, or has it been cultivated to serve purposes beyond your awareness? This video is sponsored by my new personal channel where I cover all things fringe and unexplained. If you'd like to help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers, you can find the link down below. And now back to the video. Simulation theory suggests that what we experience as reality is actually an elaborate computer simulation created by a more advanced civilization. It's a modern twist on ancient skepticism about the nature of reality, popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003, who argued that if advanced civilizations could create ancestor simulations, we're likely living in one. The math is unsettling. If simulated minds eventually outnumbered biological ones across cosmic history, the odds that you're made of flesh rather than code become vanishingly small. Every glitch in reality, every coincidence that seems too perfect, every deja vu moment might be a computational artifact. You might notice these simulation errors more once you're aware of them, that strange moment when your keys weren't where you left them, or when you could swear the street layout changed overnight. Some physicists have even suggested that certain quantum mechanical properties of our universe resemble the optimization shortcuts a programmer might use to render reality more efficiently. The implications ripple outward endlessly. If we're simulated, who created the simulation? And for what purpose? Are they watching us? Intervening in our lives? Perhaps they're running experiments, or maybe our entire universe exists merely for entertainment. And if our creators are themselves simulated beings, we face an infinite regression of realities within realities. The most disturbing possibility might be that the simulation could end at any moment, perhaps when it yields whatever data its creators sought, or simply when they grow bored and switch it off. What would it mean for your life if nothing was, quote, real in the traditional sense? Would your choices, relationships, and experiences lose meaning, or would they remain just as precious, regardless of the substrate they exist upon? Even in a simulation, your consciousness experiences joy, pain, love, and wonder with the same subjective intensity. Perhaps the question isn't whether our reality is simulated, but whether the distinction ultimately matters at all. Determinism sneaks into our lives in those moments when we wonder if we ever truly make choices at all. The universe, according to this perspective, is like an impossibly complex billiard table where each collision was set in motion at the beginning of time. Every decision you believe you're making, from what you had for breakfast to your career path, was predetermined by prior causes stretching back to the beginning of the universe. Your feeling of deliberation is just an illusion, a story your consciousness tells itself while physical laws carry out their inevitable work. But what does this mean for us as thinking beings? If determinism holds true, then free will, as most understand it, becomes a comfortable fiction. The criminal's actions, the saint's kindness, your decision to keep watching this video, all were inescapable outcomes of physical processes playing out exactly as they must. Some philosophers embrace compatibilism, suggesting that meaningful choice can exist even within a determined system. Others point to quantum mechanics and its inherent randomness as potential escape hatches from the deterministic prison. But these alternatives offer cold comfort when faced with the possibility that the entire script of your life was written in the positions of particles billions of years ago. And perhaps most unsettling is how determinism transforms our understanding of personal identity. When you feel pride in your accomplishments or shame for your mistakes, what exactly are you taking credit or blame for? If you couldn't have done otherwise, the concepts of desert and merit begin to unravel. Your entire sense of self, the story of who you are and why you do what you do, becomes suspect. Are you just a complex machine running a program you did not write? Feeling emotions about outcomes you could not avoid? And if so, does knowing this free you in some way? Or is even that realization just another predetermined step in the cosmic algorithm? Death comes for us all, an inescapable horizon that frames every human life. From the moment we're born, we begin our journey toward this universal ending. Yet we spend most of our days skillfully ignoring this fundamental truth. Ancient philosophers called it the ultimate equalizer, whether emperor or peasant, genius or fool. Death claims each of us without exception, making time our most precious and limited resource. You might find comfort in viewing death not as an opponent, but as life's natural counterweight. Without death, would life hold the same urgency or sweetness? The Japanese concept of mono no aware celebrates this very transience. The poignant beauty of cherry blossoms lies precisely in their brief flowering period. Our impermanence creates the conditions for meaning, pushing us to prioritize, connect, and create while we can. Some traditions even suggest that death is not an ending, but a transformation, a doorway rather than a wall. We've developed countless cultural and philosophical responses to death's challenge. Some build monuments, have children, or create art as attempts at symbolic immortality. Others find meaning in acceptance, treating death not as a failure, but as a completion, the final brushstroke that finishes a painting. Perhaps the most profound question isn't how to avoid death, but how to live authentically in its shadow.
Like this video and subscribe to Maker.
Infinity stretches before us like an endless horizon, a concept that seems simple at first glance, but quickly unravels into a paradox. We use this specific symbol casually, as if we could truly comprehend something without bounds, but genuinely infinity eludes our finite minds. The ancient Greeks recognized this tension, with Aristotle distinguishing potential infinity, the endless process of counting, and actual infinity, a completed totality that troubled philosophers for millennia. You might have heard the quandary of the hotel with infinite rooms that can always accommodate one more guest, or ponder Zeno's paradox, where Achilles can never catch the tortoise because the distance between them can be divided infinitely. These thought experiments expose the cracks in our intuition. When mathematicians like Georg Cantor proved some infinities are larger than others, it shattered conventional understanding. The infinity of real numbers, between 0 and 1, is demonstrably larger than the infinity of all counting numbers stretching forever, a result that drove some of Cantor's contemporaries to reject his work entirely. Our universe might be spatially infinite, expanding eternally in all directions, or perhaps it loops back on itself in dimensions we cannot perceive. Theologians speak of divine infinity, while physicists search for it in the cosmos. Yet both approach the concept with a mixture of fascination and dread. The infinite regression of causes, the possibility of infinite parallel universes, the eternal return. These concepts leave us suspended between wonder and existential vertigo. What does it mean for your choices if every possibility plays out across infinite realities? What becomes of individual significance against the backdrop of limitless time? Aging surrounds us all, yet we rarely confront its full implications until we're forced to. That gray hair you noticed this morning, the slight creak in your knees when climbing stairs, the growing collection of reading glasses scattered around your home. These aren't just inconveniences, but whispers of your own mortality. As our bodies change, we experience time's unidirectional flow, not as an abstract concept, but as physical reality etched into our very being. Aging becomes particularly unsettling in how it transforms from distant concept to intimate companion. In youth, old age exists as some far-off theoretical state happening to other people. And then one day, you notice the subtle shifts. Recovery takes longer, energy diminishes, and your reflection shows someone increasingly resembling your parents. The philosophical weight of aging isn't just about physical decline, but also identity itself. Are you the same person at 70 that you were at 17? If consciousness emerges from physical processes, what happens as those processes inevitably deteriorate? Another disturbing aspect is aging's inescapability. Throughout human history, countless brilliant minds have sought the fountain of youth, pursuing everything from alchemical elixirs to modern genetic interventions. Yet, despite our technological prowess, we remain fundamentally time-bound creatures. The same processes that enable our existence, cell division, metabolism, consciousness, contain the seeds of our own undoing. Time's arrow moves only in one direction, carrying us along regardless of our protests. But could this limitation itself be meaningful? Would immortality render life less precious, less urgent? Or is that merely what we tell ourselves to accept the unacceptable? The human condition challenges us to confront what it actually means to be alive as a human being. Caught between our animal nature and our capacity for abstract thought, we experience a unique form of suffering that comes from self-awareness. You wake up one morning and suddenly realize you're a conscious entity hurling through space on a rock, aware of your own mortality, yet still needing to decide what to have for breakfast. This fundamental absurdity, knowing the universe is vast and indifferent while simultaneously worrying about everyday concerns, creates a tension at the core of existence. Throughout history, philosophers have attempted to define what separates humans from other beings. Is it our ability to reason, our capacity for language, or perhaps our awareness of our own inevitable death? Whatever the answer, the human condition encapsulates this strange middle ground where we build civilizations and create meaning while knowing their temporary constructions. We seek purpose in a universe that offers no inherent direction, crafting stories and systems to make sense of random cosmic events. Another unsettling aspect isn't just that we die, but that we live knowing that we will die. This awareness colors everything: our relationships, our achievements, our daily routines. When you stand at the edge of an ocean, feeling simultaneously insignificant and deeply connected to everything, that's the human condition washing over you. When a perfect moment of joy is tinged with the knowledge that it cannot last forever, that's the human condition whispering in your ear. Perhaps the most profound question isn't why we suffer, but how we continue to find beauty and meaning despite understanding the fundamental limitations of our existence. Boredom seems like such a trivial complaint, something we brush off as a quick scroll through social media or a simple channel change. But philosophers have long recognized it as something far more profound. The German thinker Arthur Schopenhauer saw boredom as evidence of existence's emptiness, calling it the realization that, quote, life has no intrinsic worth. When you're truly bored, you're not just momentarily unoccupied. You're facing a mirror reflecting the potential meaningless of your daily pursuits. You might notice that boredom feels increasingly unbearable in our hyper-stimulated world. We frantically avoid it, treating the sensation like an emergency, requiring immediate intervention. But what if boredom serves as a necessary gateway? Heidegger suggested that profound boredom might be the very mood that reveals our authentic relationship with time and existence. These empty moments, when nothing holds your attention, might actually be opportunities to encounter what he called the nothing, that discomforting space where we confront our freedom and finitude. Interestingly, our collective flight from boredom through endless entertainment and distraction might be precisely what prevents deeper engagement with life. The constant dopamine hits from notification bells and scrolling feeds keeps us perpetually stimulated, but potentially numb to meaning. Some existentialists argue that embracing boredom rather than escaping it could be the first step towards creating authentic purpose. Next time that familiar emptiness washes over you, what might happen if, instead of reaching for your phone, you simply sat with the feeling and asked, "What is this boredom trying to tell me about how I'm living?" Grief doesn't merely visit us when someone dies. It arrives whenever we face the permanent absence of something we've woven into the fabric of our existence. Think about how your daily routines incorporate the people, places, and possibilities you care about. Now imagine those connections severed, leaving gaping holes where meaning once resided. What remains is not just sadness, but a fundamental reorganization of your world, a redistribution of significance that forces you to navigate unfamiliar emotional territory. You might notice that time behaves strangely during grief, stretching moments into eternities or compressing months into fleeting sensations. This temporal distortion reflects how grief isn't a linear process, but rather a cyclical journey of acceptance and regression. The ancient Stoics vowed grief as a natural but ultimately irrational response to the inevitable flow of existence, while modern existentialists see it as evidence of our capacity for attachment in an otherwise indifferent universe. Both perspectives acknowledge a troubling reality. The depth of our grief directly corresponds to the depth of our connections. Another unsettling aspect is how grief reveals the provisional nature of our identities. When we lose someone or something central to our self-concept, we lose access to parts of ourselves that existed only in relation to what's now gone. The philosopher Heidegger might suggest that authentic grief is not something to overcome, but to embrace, as a testament to our finite nature and the courage required to form meaningful bonds despite their inevitable dissolution. Sonder strikes us in those rare moments when we truly grasp that each random passerby lives a life as vivid and complex as our own. It's the sudden awareness while watching strangers in a coffee shop or passing cars on the highway, each containing consciousness as rich as yours, with their own ongoing stories, worries, and triumphs that you will never know about. The term itself was coined in the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, capturing that peculiar feeling when the background characters of your life suddenly reveal themselves as protagonists of their own. Right now, billions of intricate lives are unfolding simultaneously. The tired cashier scanning your groceries might be worrying about their sick parent. The person who cut you off in traffic might be rushing to a job interview that could change their life. Each stranger you've ever glanced at contains an entire universe of experiences, memories, and relationships that will forever remain alien to you. This recognition can be both humbling and terrifying, revealing how deeply limited our perspective truly is. The existential weight of Sonder comes from recognizing our cognitive limitations. We simply cannot comprehend the full complexity of even one other consciousness, let alone the billions that exist. Yet, acknowledging this limitation paradoxically expands our humanity. When we remember that every person we encounter is navigating their own complex reality, our capacity for empathy deepens. A profound question that Sonder raises is whether truly understanding one another is even possible, or if we're all just passing ships in the night, catching only glimpses of each other's inner worlds. Theism emerged as humanity's first attempt to make sense of our bewildering existence, crafting divine figures who could explain everything from thunderstorms to tragedy. When you strip away the various mythologies and theological frameworks, what remains is a fundamental proposition. Consciousness preceded matter, intention preceded accident, and purpose preceded chaos. This perspective flips our modern materialist assumptions, suggesting that mind is the foundation of reality rather than its byproduct, and that the universe itself might be understood as a thought rather than a thing. The real existential weight of theism is not found in debates about religious texts or miracle claims, but in contemplating what it means if we truly live in a universe where we're being watched, judged, and potentially guided. A theistic universe is one where privacy is fundamentally impossible, where moral choices carry cosmic significance, and where our sufferings might serve some greater narrative we cannot comprehend. Even for the non-religious, the possibility that reality possesses awareness creates a profound shift in how we understand our place within it. Are we participants in a relationship with existence itself, rather than accidental observers of mindless processes? Now, what makes theism simultaneously comforting and terrifying is how it addresses the problem of cosmic significance. If conscious intention underlies reality, then perhaps nothing is truly random or meaningless. But this same premise suggests we are never truly alone with our thoughts, never beyond the reach of judgment, and never exempt from serving some greater purpose, whether we consent to it or not. Does the prospect of living in a minded universe reassure you, or does it feel like living forever under an inescapable cosmic spotlight? You've likely gazed up at the night sky, marveling at the vast expanse of stars, and wondered, are we alone in the universe? We Are Not Alone ventures beyond the familiar question of alien life into a more profound existential territory. The concept suggests that consciousness may extend far beyond human experience, permeating the cosmos in ways we've barely begun to comprehend. From ancient animalistic beliefs to modern panpsychism, philosophers have long contemplated whether mind might be a fundamental property of reality itself rather than merely an emergent phenomenon of complex brains. Consider the unsettling implications if consciousness exists across different scales and forms throughout the universe. Perhaps information and processing systems, from quantum fields to neural networks to galactic clusters, all participate in various modes of experience totally alien to our own. The boundaries between observer and observed, between self and universe, become increasingly blurred. What if that feeling of being watched when nobody's around is not just paranoia, but an intuition of wider cosmic attention? The silence of space might not indicate absence, but rather communication we cannot yet understand. The isolation we feel as species might be more like a child's belief that they're invisible when covering their eyes, a limitation of perception rather than reality. Some theoretical physicists now suggest consciousness might be woven into the fundamental fabric of our existence, challenging our anthropocentric worldview, whether through multi-dimensional beings, parallel universes, or forms of awareness beyond our current scientific framework. The possibility that we are not alone forces us to reconsider our place in the grand cosmic story. The real question here is if we are prepared to recognize them, if they have been here all along. Being isn't just a word philosophers toss around to sound profound. It's the fundamental backdrop of everything we experience. When you wake up each morning, before thought or memory kicks in, there's that raw sense of existence, that you simply are. This primordial awareness precedes language, identity, and all the stories we tell ourselves about who we think we are. Most of us spend our lives entirely focused on the content of our experience, the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that fill our consciousness. But what about consciousness itself, the empty space that holds it all? We rarely question this mysterious canvas upon which our entire lives unfold. When we do turn our attention toward pure being, something strange happens. We discover an awareness that cannot be objectified, that's both intimately familiar and utterly unknowable. Heidegger distinguished between beings, things that exist, and being itself, the very happening of existence. He believed modern society had forgotten the question of being, becoming lost in technological thinking and treating everything as resources to be used. An unsettling aspect of contemplating being is the realization that this fundamental mystery is not something distant or abstract. It's what you already are, beneath all identifications and mental constructs. What would your life feel like if you regularly paused to sense the sheer wonder of being itself? Not as an intellectual exercise, but as a lived recognition of the astonishing fact that anything exists at all. Perhaps what makes this concept so destabilizing isn't its complexity, but its simplicity. A simplicity that cuts through all our elaborate defenses against facing the raw, unfiltered nature of existence. Ethics quietly shapes our lives, guiding our choices from the mundane to the monumental without ever announcing its presence. When we debate whether to tell a white lie or speak a painful truth, we're wading into ethical waters that philosophers have navigated for thousands of years. These moral frameworks attempt to answer one deceptively simple question: how should we live? The unsettling reality of ethics is that seemingly reasonable approaches can lead to wildly different conclusions. Consequentialists judge actions by their outcomes. Would you sacrifice one person to save 5? Others focus on rules and duties regardless of consequences. Some things remain wrong even if they produce good results. Virtue ethicists care less about specific acts and more about developing character traits that lead to flourishing. Yet, each system crumbles under certain edge cases, revealing gaps where our moral intuitions clash with logical consistency. Unlike scientific questions, moral disagreements cannot be settled by collecting more data. Two people can agree completely on all facts, but reach completely opposite ethical conclusions. And as we develop technologies like artificial intelligence or genetic engineering, we face unprecedented dilemmas our traditional moral frameworks were simply not designed to handle. Are we creating tools faster than our ethical wisdom can evolve to guide their use? Our deeply held moral convictions might be largely products of cultural conditioning or evolutionary psychology, adaptations that helped our ancestors survive rather than reflections of objective moral truths. Does this mean ethics is merely relative, or could universal principles exist despite our limited perspective? When you feel that gut certainty about right and wrong, what exactly are you sensing? God, that elusive concept at the heart of humanity's deepest questions. Throughout history, we've envisioned all-knowing creators, distant watchmakers, or cosmic consciousness pervading everything. But what if God isn't what we've been told? What if our limited human minds simply cannot comprehend what might exist beyond the boundaries of our understanding? You've probably wondered it about yourself, those late-night thoughts that creep in when your world grows quiet. Is there a divine plan, or are we adrift in cosmic randomness? The philosophical implications cut to the core of our existence. Consider that many philosophers argue the very concept of God presents a logical paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a stone too heavy for them to lift? The question itself reveals the limitations of applying human reasoning to something potentially beyond comprehension. Another unsettling perspective might not be whether God exists, but whether such existence would even matter. If a divine being operates on scales of time and space beyond our comprehension, would our individual lives register as anything more than the momentary existence of a single cell in a vast cosmic body? Perhaps the real existential question isn't about God's existence, but about meaning itself, whether bestowed from above or created from within. After all, in a universe with or without divinity, we still face the same fundamental question. How do we find purpose in our brief moment of consciousness? Nothingness haunts the edges of human thought, that vast emptiness that both terrifies and fascinates us. Various philosophers have wrestled with this concept, trying to grasp what it means to contemplate absolute void. The ancient Greeks believed that nothing could not exist, that even empty space must be filled with something. Yet, modern physics suggests differently, with quantum fluctuations emerging from what appears to be a complete vacuum, challenging our very understanding of absence. And what does it mean to contemplate nothingness? Unlike other philosophical concepts, this one resists direct examination, like trying to see darkness by shining a light on it. The very act of thinking about nothing transforms it into something. You might experience a taste of this paradox when falling asleep, that brief moment when consciousness begins to dissolve, not quite gone, but not quite present, suspended between being and non-being. This liminal state offers perhaps our closest experiential glimpse of what nothingness might feel like. For some, consciousness itself is a kind of nothingness, a negative space that allows us to stand apart from the world and question it. This ability to negate, to imagine what is not, forms the foundation of human freedom. Without nothingness, there could be no possibility, no choice, no becoming. Perhaps what scares us about nothingness is not emptiness at all, but the freedom it represents. In facing the void, we're confronted with the awesome responsibility of creating meaning where none inherently exists. Technology surrounds us, shapes us, and increasingly defines us. We create these tools to extend our reach, to solve problems, to make life easier. Yet, in that creation, we may be fashioning our own philosophical cage. Consider how each generation views technologies from just 20 years prior as practically ancient, while simultaneously being unable to imagine life without their current devices. This acceleration creates a strange temporal distortion where we're constantly living in what feels like both the future and the past simultaneously. You might wonder if we're still the masters of our technological creations, or if we've become servants to the digital infrastructure we've built. The smartphones in our pockets and the algorithms that curate our experiences are not passive tools. They actively shape our attention, our social connections, and even our thought patterns. Heidegger warned that technology doesn't just change what we do, but fundamentally alters what we are and how we perceive the world around us. What begins as convenience slowly transforms into dependency. The same devices that liberate us from physical limitations also tether us to new forms of obligations and surveillance. We trade privacy for connection, autonomy for efficiency, and perhaps most unsettling is how seamlessly this transition happens, not through force, but through our eager participation. The existential question becomes not whether technology will advance, but whether we can maintain our humanity as it does. Are we creating tools that enhance our human experience, or are we reshaping ourselves to better interface with our tools? Emptiness, unlike nothingness, is the absence of substance, a void filled with potential yet devoid of meaning. It's a hollow space, an open canvas, and for many, it's a condition that evokes both unease and possibility. Eastern philosophies, particularly Buddhism, have long seen emptiness not as an absence of all things, but as an inherent lack of intrinsic selfhood in all things. The Buddha spoke of sunyata, the emptiness of all phenomena, suggesting that nothing possesses an independent, unchanging essence. All things, including ourselves, are empty of permanence, dependent upon countless interwoven causes and conditions. Emptiness, in this case, is not a complete void of nothingness, but a space of impermanence. It is the realization that we cling to as real in this constant flux, always shifting, always vanishing. It's the sensation that you might feel when looking at an object or an idea that seems so concrete and familiar, yet upon deeper reflection, you realize it's a fleeting nature. The people we love, the identities we build, the thoughts we hold, each of them is empty, not in the sense of being non-existent, but because they lack inherent, unchanging identity. Modern psychology speaks to a similar emptiness in human experience. A sense of profound alienation or disconnection can arise from realizing that the world around us, from relationships to material possessions, can never fully satisfy the hunger within. In these moments, we may feel as though something is missing, a void that we cannot fill, even though the world itself remains abundant with things. This emptiness doesn't scream of nothingness. It whispers of everything being just out of reach, slipping away, forever transient. Yet, it's this emptiness that new possibilities emerge. If the world is empty of fixed meaning, then we are free to craft our own. Like an artist faced with a blank page, emptiness invites creation, a space for shaping our reality. Far from the nihilistic void, it can be the birthplace of meaning, of purpose, of self-discovery. Embracing emptiness may not remove the discomfort of knowing that all things are fleeting, but it opens the door to the profound realization that everything we encounter is imbued with the potential to transform into something meaningful, if we choose to fill it. Morals are the invisible architecture of human society, the shared agreements that allow us to navigate our relationships with each other and ourselves. Every decision you make, from telling a simple white lie to standing up for someone being mistreated, exists within a framework of right and wrong that you've been developing since childhood. This framework is not static. It evolves with your experiences, your culture, and your understanding of the world around you. What makes moral frameworks fascinating is their paradoxical nature. They feel deeply personal and intuitive. We often experience moral reactions as gut feelings before we can even articulate why something feels wrong. Yet, simultaneously, morals are profoundly social constructs, varying dramatically across the cultures and throughout history. The moral certainties of ancient Greece or medieval Japan would seem alien to us today, just as some of our own moral assumptions might perplex our ancestors or contemporaries from different societies. The question that haunts philosophers isn't just what is right, but what makes something right. Is morality simply a social contract we agree to for mutual benefit? Is it connected to some objective truth about human flourishing? Or perhaps morality is merely just an illusion, a story we tell ourselves to make sense of behaviors that evolved for entirely different reasons. When we dig deeper, even the most confident moral stances reveal hidden complexities, contradictions, and assumptions that resist simple answers. We often think of moral progress as inevitable, but history teaches us that moral understanding can be lost as easily as it can be gained. Societies have moved both toward and away from recognizing the humanity in others, toward and away from valuing equality, toward and away from respecting individual autonomy. What moral blind spots might we have today that future generations will find obvious? And which of our moral certainties might they question or abandon entirely? ATHAZAGORAPHOBIA, the fear of being forgotten or ignored, lurks in the quieter corners of human consciousness. You might recognize this feeling when scrolling through social media, watching your post sit without engagement, or when attempting to share a story at a gathering, only to have that conversation shift before you finish. It's not just about being ignored in the moment. It's the deeper dread that you might slip from memory entirely, that your existence might leave no meaningful impression on the world or those you care about. Throughout history, humans have built monuments, created art, and written texts, partly at attempts to extend beyond our limited lifespans. We carve our names into trees, establish foundations in our names, or hope children might carry forward some essences of who we were. The digital age has complicated this fear, offering unprecedented opportunities for documentation while simultaneously drowning individual voices in an ocean of content. Your digital footprint might persist for centuries, yet paradoxically, the sheer volume makes true remembrance much less likely. What separates healthy legacy building from the grip of ATHAZAGORAPHOBIA is the desperate quality of the latter. Those in its clutches often find themselves constantly seeking validation, over-communicating, or engaging in increasingly dramatic behaviors simply to ensure they remain present in others' thoughts. It's suggested our awareness of mortality actually gives life meaning. But what happens when we fear not death itself, but the complete erasure of our having existed at all? Perhaps true peace comes not from fighting against eventual forgetting, but from finding value in the quiet moments of connection that need no audience or permanence to matter. We are alone. The phrase echoes through human consciousness, not merely as a statement about physical isolation, but as a fundamental truth about our existential condition. Consider the last time you felt utterly understood by another person, truly, completely comprehended. That sensation's rarity speaks to a profound philosophical reality. Consciousness creates boundaries that cannot be fully crossed. You might share your life with loved ones, colleagues, and companions, yet a gap always remains. Thomas Nagel famously argued that we can never know what it is like to be another human being, not truly. Even identical twins, sharing nearly identical DNA and often similar life experiences, remain divided by the unbridgeable chasm of separate consciousness. This isolation isn't just physical or social, it's baked into the very structure of awareness itself. The German term Eigengrau describes the dark gray colors seen by the eye in perfect darkness, unique to each person and impossible to share. Our inner lives function similarly, with each mind an island accessible only to itself. Yet paradoxically, this universal aloneness connects us all. We're united in our inability to unite completely, each experiencing a private universe while inhabiting a shared reality. Perhaps there's comfort in knowing everyone else is just as alone as you are, all of us coming together in our fundamental separation. Nihilism emerges from a simple yet devastating realization. Perhaps nothing we do truly matters in any objective sense. When Friedrich Nietzsche proclaimed "God is dead" in the late 19th century, he was not celebrating this fact, but warning of the vacuum of meaning that would follow. Without external sources of purpose or value, we're left staring into an indifferent universe that existed long before us and will continue long after we're gone. The stars don't care about your suffering or joy. The cosmos remains unmoved by our greatest achievements. Yet, nihilism isn't necessarily a philosophy of despair. Some thinkers have embraced this apparent meaningless as a form of liberation. If nothing inherently matters, then you're free to create your own meaning, rather than accepting values imposed from outside. This perspective transforms nihilism from a prison of emptiness into a canvas of possibility. Perhaps meaning exists not in some grand cosmic scheme, but in the choices we make despite knowing our ultimate insignificance. Most unsettling is how nihilism creeps into everyday moments. That strange feeling when you realize your carefully constructed life plans are arbitrary patterns imposed on chaos. Or that fleeting sensation while driving that none of your destinations really matter more than others. We build elaborate structures of meaning through careers, relations, and beliefs, but nihilism whispers that these are merely comfortable fictions. The question isn't whether nihilism is true, but whether we can bear to live with the weight of its implications, or if we must create new values in its wake. Derealization and depersonalization are phenomena that can make you feel as though you're trapped behind a pane of foggy glass, observing reality from a disconnected distance. Imagine walking through a familiar street that suddenly feels artificial, like a movie set where everything looks slightly off and unreal. This derealization, the unsettling sense that the world around you has become unfamiliar or dreamlike, its counterpart, depersonalization, turns that disconnection inward, making your own thoughts, feelings, and body feel foreign, as if you're watching yourself perform actions rather than experiencing them directly. Throughout history, philosophers like Descartes have wrestled with similar questions about reality and consciousness. What if everything we perceive is merely an elaborate illusion? How can we be certain that our experiences correspond to an objective reality? These are not just academic concerns. They're existential questions that become viscerally real for those experiencing dissociative episodes. While these states can occur briefly in perfectly healthy individuals during stress or fatigue, persistent episodes might signal deeper psychological struggles. One particularly unnerving aspect is how they undermine our most fundamental assumption, that our perception of reality is trustworthy. They remind us that consciousness itself is a constructed experience, one that can become fragmented when the brain's processing systems encounter unusual stress. Yet, there's something profoundly human about questioning reality. It's both the source of deep existential anxiety and the foundation of philosophical inquiry that has driven human thought for millennia. Absurdism greets us at the intersection of our desperate search for meaning and the universe's cold silence in response. Developed primarily by Albert Camus in the mid-20th century, this philosophical stance acknowledges a fundamental conflict. Humans instinctively seek purpose and clarity in existence, yet the world offers no inherent meaning whatsoever. Unlike nihilism, which might suggest abandoning the search entirely, absurdism recognizes this tension as the defining feature of human experience. We keep pushing our boulder up the hill like Sisyphus, knowing full well that it will roll back down. The beauty of absurdism lies in its liberating conclusion that we can create subjective meaning despite cosmic indifference. When you realize the universe has no grand plan for your life, you're free to construct your own significance through choices, relationships, and experiences. Absurdism doesn't ask you to despair, but to rebel against meaninglessness by embracing the absurd condition with a mixture of defiance and joy. The philosophical approach rejects both suicide and blind faith as ways of escaping the absurd, instead advocating for living fully within the tension. This actually undermines nearly every cultural narrative we use to make sense of existence. Those career achievements, moral codes, and even relationships, all human constructs imposed upon a fundamentally indifferent reality. Yet there's something profoundly human about continuing to care, create, and connect, even while acknowledging the ultimate absurdity of these pursuits. Perhaps the most authentic response to an absurd universe is not finding the right answer, but learning to ask better questions. DASEIN, a term championed by Heidegger, literally translates as being there, and revolutionized how we think about human existence. Unlike previous philosophical traditions that sought to divide mind from body or subject from object, DASEIN proposes that we are fundamentally beings who are always already thrown into the world, inseparable from it. We don't merely observe reality as detached spectators. We're immersed in it, engaged with it, concerned about it in ways that shape our very identity. Consider how you navigate your daily life without constantly analyzing every doorknob you touch or every chair you sit in. This illustrates Heidegger's concept of ready to hand, the way we primarily relate to things through practical engagement rather than theoretical knowledge. Yet sometimes, when something breaks or puzzles us, it becomes present at hand, suddenly visible as an object of contemplation. This shifting relationship with the world around you isn't just an interesting observation, it's central to what makes us uniquely human. But DASEIN carries a profound existential weight. You're not just any being that happens to exist. You're a being whose existence is an issue for itself. You worry about your life, make plans, reflect on the past, and face your finite nature. Authenticity emerges when you confront this temporal structure of existence, acknowledging that you're always stretching between birth and death, always becoming, never complete. Self-deception is the peculiar human talent where we lie to ourselves so convincingly that we don't even realize we're doing it. We build elaborate mental structures to avoid uncomfortable truths, like architects designing beautiful buildings on unstable ground. The mind employs an impressive array of mechanisms: confirmation bias, rationalization, selective memory, all working in concert to maintain our preferred version of reality, rather than confronting what actually exists. You might recognize this phenomenon in everyday life. That relationship you stayed in far too long because you ignored the red flags. Those health warnings you dismiss while telling yourself you'll start exercising next week. The politician whose flaws you overlook because you support your team. These are not simple mistakes, but sophisticated psychological maneuvers designed to protect your sense of self. What makes self-deception truly fascinating is how we can simultaneously be both the deceiver and the deceived. The real danger emerges when self-deception operates at a societal level. Entire civilizations have embraced comforting narratives over harsh realities, from refusing to acknowledge environmental collapse to maintaining systems of inequality by pretending they're natural or just. Some philosophers have called this bad faith, a kind of inauthenticity where we deny our fundamental freedom and responsibility by pretending we have no choice in how we interpret our circumstances. Perhaps the most unsettling question is not whether you engage in self-deception, we all do, but rather what truths are you actively avoiding right now? What story are you telling yourself that, if examined honestly, might crumble under scrutiny? The true mark of wisdom might not be certainty, but to constantly question your most cherished beliefs and ask, am I seeing this reality clearly, or just the version I find easiest to accept? In the quiet darkness of night, when the world slumbers peacefully, some of us lie awake, trapped in the prison of insomnia. That peculiar state between consciousness and unconsciousness where time stretches into infinity and thoughts become both sharper and more distorted. We're suddenly aware of every creak in the floorboards, every tick of the clock, every incomplete task or conversation from our day. During these sleepless nights, you might find yourself confronting questions that daylight hours let you avoid. Who am I when no one is watching? Why does time feel so different in this liminal space? The philosopher Emile Cioran, himself a longtime insomniac, once wrote that sleeplessness reveals the true nature of existence, a state of perpetual wakefulness to the void that surrounds us. Perhaps there's something about being awake when we should be asleep that strips away our comfortable illusions. What makes insomnia particularly interesting from an existential perspective is how it forces us into an uncomfortably intimate relation with our own consciousness. Without the distractions of daily life, we're left alone with our thoughts, fears, and the gnawing awareness of our own mortality. The night becomes an unwanted meditation retreat where escape into sleep remains tantalizingly out of reach. And yet many great insights and creative breakthroughs have emerged from these nighttime wrestling matches with existence. Lost knowledge surrounds us like ghosts we can't quite see. Think about the Library of Alexandria, where countless ancient texts burned, taking with them innovations, stories, and wisdom we'll never recover. But this phenomenon extends far beyond dramatic historical events. Every day, traditional skills slip away as elders pass without transferring their expertise. Languages die, taking unique concepts with them, and scientific insights get buried in forgotten journals or classified archives. You might wonder if our digital age has solved this problem. After all, we're recording more information than ever before. Yet, paradoxically, we face new vulnerabilities. Digital formats become obsolete, rendering data inaccessible. Code dependencies break, making programs unusable. And the sheer volume of information creates a different kind of loss. Valuable knowledge drowning in oceans of noise. What we collectively know is vast, but what any individual can grasp grows proportionately smaller. The philosophical implications go deeper than practical concerns. When knowledge disappears, we lose not just facts, but entire frameworks for understanding reality. Indigenous perspectives on sustainability, ancient philosophical traditions, or medical compounds discovered through millennia of observation, once these are gone, we don't even know what questions we've lost the ability to ask. Perhaps what's most unsettling is considering the crucial knowledge might have already vanished, leaving holes in our collective understanding that we can't even identify. The innate inferiority complex lurks in the shadows of our consciousness, whispering that some people are fundamentally less valuable than others from birth. Unlike regular insecurity that can be overcome, this concept suggests certain individuals or groups are inherently, unavoidably inferior, not through any action of their own, but by the mere circumstance of their existence. Throughout history, this pernicious idea has fueled everything from casual discrimination to systemic oppression, as those in power convinced themselves and others that the hierarchies they created were simply reflecting nature's own design. When we examine ourselves honestly, many of us discover we've internalized some version of this thinking. You might find yourself believing you lack some essential quality others possess, a natural talent, intellectual capacity, or moral fiber that no amount of effort could ever develop. This isn't just garden variety self-doubt. It's the gnawing sensation that you were somehow born missing something fundamental that others received. This thinking extends beyond the self to others, creating dividing lines between those deemed naturally worthy and those presumed inherently lacking. Philosophers have long debated whether these hierarchical instincts are themselves innate or entirely constructed. Some evolutionary psychologists suggest humans evolved to recognize and rank natural variations in abilities, while social theorists argue these frameworks are deliberately manufactured to maintain power structures. The truth likely involves both. Our tendency to compare creates fertile ground where artificial hierarchies can take root and flourish. Perhaps the most troubling question is not whether differences exist between people, but why we so readily transform those differences into comprehensive judgments of human worth. What drives our need to believe some lives naturally matter more than others? Schadenfreude exists in those uncomfortable moments when you catch yourself smiling at someone else's misfortune. That fleeting satisfaction when your competitive coworker spills coffee before their big presentation, or the strange comfort in watching celebrities face public humiliation. The term itself combines the German words for harm and joy, creating a perfect linguistic snapshot of this peculiar emotional experience that most of us would rather not admit to feeling. And it actually exposes the darker corners of human empathy. We like to think of ourselves as compassionate beings, yet this feeling reveals a shadow self that occasionally celebrates the suffering of others. Psychologists suggest this reaction often stems from our innate social comparison tendencies. When others fail, we may feel relatively more successful or virtuous by comparison. There's something profoundly revealing about how Schadenfreude intensifies when misfortune befalls those we envy or consider undeserving of their status. And perhaps most disturbing is considering whether this represents an evolutionary adaptation rather than a moral failing. In resource-competitive environments, another's loss might genuinely translate to your gain. This raises uncomfortable questions about whether our capacity for empathy has natural limitations built directly into the neurological wiring. Is it possible that genuine universal compassion is more aspirational than natural? When you next notice that spark of pleasure at someone else's downfall, what is this telling you about the boundaries of human connection? Morality shapes our lives in ways we rarely stop to consider. That feeling in your gut when you witness an injustice, the pride when you help someone in need, the guilt when you break a promise. These emotional responses form the invisible architecture of our social existence. But what happens when we look beneath the surface of morality and ask the uncomfortable question? Is there any objective foundation to our ethical judgments, or are we simply participating in an elaborate cultural fiction? Throughout history, philosophers have offered competing answers. Some argue that morality comes from divine command, others that it emerges from rational principles we can discover through reason alone, while still others maintain that morality is merely a useful evolutionary adaptation that helps our species survive. You might feel certain that torturing innocent beings for fun is wrong, but can you prove it to someone who disagrees? The more we examine our deepest moral convictions, the more we confront the possibility that the moral universe we inhabit might be built on shifting sands rather than bedrock. And perhaps most unsettling is how our moral certainties change across time and place. Actions considered virtuous in one era become unthinkable in another. Practices accepted in one society are condemned in others. Even within our own minds, we often hold contradictory ethical positions without even realizing it. When we truly grasp the contingent nature of morality, we're left wondering, if our moral compass has no true north, how can we navigate life's most challenging decisions? If the morality is merely relative, what stops the powerful from defining right and wrong to serve their interests? What if the very act of thinking, the cornerstone of human experience, became your greatest terror? Dementaphobia, the fear of going insane or losing your mind, lurks in the shadows of consciousness where rationality meets its boundaries. Unlike many phobias that focus on external threats, this fear turns inward, making the sufferer question the reliability of their own thoughts and perceptions. It's the unsettling recognition that the same mind we depend on to navigate reality could become our prison. Think about how tenuous our grip on sanity sometimes feels. Those intrinsic thoughts that appear from nowhere, the occasional inability to recall simple words, or moments of derealization where familiar surroundings briefly seem alien. These glitches in our mental processing remind us how fragile our cognitive integrity might be. For someone with dementaphobia, these ordinary cognitive hiccups transform into threatening omens, potential evidence that the self is unraveling thread by thread. The fear speaks to something more profound than clinical concerns about mental illness. It touches our existential dread about identity itself. If your thoughts define who you are, what happens when you can no longer trust these thoughts? Throughout human history, we've observed how quickly society dismisses those whose mental processes diverge from the accepted norm. Perhaps what makes dementaphobia so potent is not just the fear of losing our minds, but losing our place as recognized, valued members of the human community. What really could be more isolating than being trapped in a reality that no one else can validate? The moment you opened your eyes this morning, were you certain you were still alive? This entry is a haunting philosophical concept, suggesting our current existence might be nothing more than a post-death experience, a memory, or perhaps a simulation running in the final milliseconds of our actual lives. The neurons firing in your brain during the final moments could be creating this elaborate reality for you now, perceived as life. Consider how time dilates in dreams or during near-death experiences. Seconds stretch into hours, minutes into years. What if our entire perceived lifetime is simply the brain's final electrical symphony before darkness? Some philosophers argue that from a certain metaphysical perspective, our future deaths are already determined facts in a block universe where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. In this view, we're already occupying our complete life timeline, including our death viewed from outside time. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus took a different approach, famously stating that death is nothing to us, because when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist. Yet this concept flips his logic. Perhaps death is already here, quietly underlying our perception of existence. Does the distinction even matter if our experience feels authentic? Whether we're alive, dead, dreaming, or simulated, the meaning we create and the connections we form remain undeniably real to us in this moment. Have you ever been absolutely certain about a memory, only to discover it never actually happened? The Mandela effect occurs when large groups of people share the same false memory, often about cultural events or details that differ from documented reality. Named after the widespread misconception that Nelson Mandela died in prison during the 1980s, when in fact he lived until 2013. It can be amazing how vivid and emotionally convincing these collective false memories can be, leaving us to wonder how many other certainties might actually be fabrications. The implications extend beyond simple misremembering. When thousands or even millions of people share the same incorrect memory, whether it's the spelling of a children's book series, the color of a cartoon character, or the wording of a famous movie quote, we begin to question the foundations of consensual reality itself. Some theorists suggest that these discrepancies might be evidence of parallel universes or timeline shifts, while neurologists point out the malleable nature of memory and our susceptibility to suggestion. Either explanation undermines our confidence in what we consider real. Perhaps most disturbing is how the Mandela effect exposes the fragility of our collective understanding. If we cannot trust our memories, the autobiographical narratives that form our identities, then what remains? Are we simply moving through life, constructing convenient fictions that help us navigate an incomprehensibly complex universe? And if our most cherished memories might be illusions shared only through some quirk of human psychology, what other aspects of our reality might be equally unstable? This entry, known as Dead Stars, represents one of the most profound temporal disconnections in our universe. We are literally gazing at history, at ghosts of light traveling across the cosmos long after their source expired. When you look up at the night sky, you're not seeing what is, but what was. This phenomenon forces us to confront the staggering scale of cosmic time compared to human existence. Our entire civilization has risen and fallen within a time frame that would register as barely a blink in astronomical terms. The light from these dead stars continues its journey through space, indifferent to the fact that its origin no longer exists, creating an illusion of permanence that masks the true impermanence of even the most massive celestial bodies. We're perpetually experiencing a delayed version of the universe, never truly in sync with cosmic reality. And what does it mean to base our understanding of the cosmos on information that's fundamentally outdated? Perhaps there's something poetic about how these dead stars continue to guide travelers and inspire dreamers long after they've collapsed. Their light persists as a kind of immortality, a way of transcending physical death through continued influence. In this way, dead stars mirror how human ideas and creations can outlive their creators, rippling through time and space in ways that we can barely comprehend. How many of our own signals are traveling outward into the universe right now, destined to arrive at distant worlds long after our own civilization has transformed beyond recognition? Ancient civilizations haunt our collective imagination not just as historical curiosities, but as profound mirrors reflecting our own existential questions. When we gaze upon the weathered stones of Göbekli Tepe or the towering ziggurats of the Mesopotamia, we're confronted with societies that grappled the same fundamental mysteries that plague us today: morality, purpose, and our place in the cosmos. These weren't primitive attempts at understanding, but sophisticated philosophical frameworks developed by minds as complex and searching as our own. You might find it unsettling to realize how many ancient civilizations independently arrived at similar cosmological conclusions despite vast geographic separation. From the Mayan belief in the cyclical time to the Egyptian concept of ma'at, cosmic balance, these parallel developments suggest either universal truths about existence or universal human psychological needs. The Sumerians, despite having no advanced telescopes, somehow knew details about our solar system that wouldn't be discovered until millennia later. Were they merely lucky guessers, or is there something more disquieting about how knowledge appears and disappears throughout human history? We comfort ourselves with narratives of progress, imagining our ancestors are less developed versions of ourselves. But what if ancient civilizations possess knowledge and wisdom we've lost? The precise stone-fitting techniques of the Inca, the mathematical sophistication of Babylonian astronomy, and the medicinal knowledge of ancient China challenge our assumption of continuous advancement. Each collapsed civilization represents not just a historical footnote, but an unsettling reminder that our own society's permanence is just an illusion. How many times has humanity reached heights of understanding only to plummet back into darkness? APEIROPHOBIA stems from the Greek apeiros, meaning boundless, and at its core, it's the fear of eternity or infinity. Many of us have experienced that moment when contemplating endless time, or perhaps during those quiet pre-dawn hours when we can't sleep. The human mind, evolved to navigate finite spaces and lifespans, recoils when trying to grasp truly limitless concepts. Unlike most phobias that fear something tangible, apeirophobia confronts us with the mathematical and philosophical sublime, the terror of that which cannot be fully comprehended. What makes this fear particularly unsettling is how it infiltrates both religious and secular worldviews. For some, the promise of eternal afterlife, meant as comfort, transforms into existential horror when fully imagined, endless consciousness without respite. For others, the scientific conception of infinite universes or endless quantum possibilities creates similar dread. Even infinity in mathematical terms, the endless decimals of pi, or the unbounded sequence of prime numbers can trigger this response in those sensitive to the concept. The paradox of apeirophobia is that while we fear the unending, we equally fear our finite nature. We exist uncomfortably between these two terrors, dreading both eternal existence and complete annihilation. Perhaps this tension reveals something fundamental about consciousness itself. Our peculiar awareness occupies a middle ground, capable of imagining eternity, but incapable of truly experiencing it. Imagine waking up one morning with all of your memories intact, only to discover that you're not human at all, but merely a disembodied brain floating in the empty void of space. This is the bizarre concept of a Boltzmann brain, named after the Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann. According to quantum physics and thermodynamics, given enough time and an infinite universe, random quantum fluctuations could theoretically assemble a fully functional, self-aware brain, complete with false memories of a past that never existed. You might be wondering what's more likely, that all the atoms in the universe aligned in perfect order to create our vast cosmos with billions of galaxies, or that a much smaller collection of atoms randomly formed just your consciousness with illusory memories of this elaborate universe. Surprisingly, the math suggests the latter might be more probable. And think about it, you've never actually verified that the universe existed before you became conscious of it. All those childhood memories? Theoretically, they could have materialized alongside your brain moments ago. And really, the truly unsettling implication isn't just that you might be a Boltzmann brain. It's that almost all conscious experiences in an eternal universe would be these brief, hallucinatory moments rather than the consistent, long-lived observers we believe ourselves to be. Every sensation you're feeling right now, even the ambient sounds around you, could be nothing more than the random firing of neurons in a cosmic accident that will dissolve back into chaos in the next instant. And what does it mean for reality if the overwhelming majority of conscious experiences are these fleeting, deluded observers? And how would you know if you are one of them? The ship of Theseus presents us with one of philosophy's oldest and most perplexing thought experiments. Imagine a vessel that's been sailing for centuries, with each rotting plank gradually replaced until a single original piece remains. Is it still the same ship? The ancient Greeks pondered this question as early as 500 BCE, with Plutarch documenting how Athenians preserved the ship for generations by continuously replacing its aging components. You might even recognize this paradox in your everyday life. Your childhood home remains the same place despite renovations. Your body replaces nearly all its cells every decade, even your memories constantly rewritten each time you recall them. Each of them raise the same fundamental question: what makes you persistently you? This puzzle ripples through modern discussion of personal identity, with philosophers like John Locke arguing that psychological continuity, not physical sameness, defines our persistent selves. The ship of Theseus doesn't just trouble philosophers, it challenges our most basic assumptions about the world. When your favorite band replaces every original member, is it still the same group? When AI perfectly replicates human consciousness in digital form, would that consciousness be the same person? Some Buddhist traditions embrace this paradox, suggesting that nothing truly has an inherent, unchanging essence. Everything exists in a perpetual state of becoming rather than being. Perhaps the error isn't in our answers, but in our questions, in our stubborn insistence that identity must remain fixed in a universe where everything flows. Entropy is that unstoppable force of nature that ensures everything eventually falls apart. You've witnessed it in your own life. the way your childhood bedroom gradually descended into chaos unless you constantly fought against it, or how that sandwich left on the counter slowly transforms from lunch into something unrecognizable. These everyday examples hint at a fundamental truth about our universe that scientists formalized in the 19th century. Disorder always increases in a closed system. In this case, the arrow of time points in the direction of increasing entropy, meaning the gradual dissolution of order isn't just a quirk of physics. It's literally what creates our experience of past, present, and future. We remember the past and not the future precisely because the past had lower entropy. Think about dropping an egg. You can easily imagine it shattering on the floor, but never spontaneously reassembling itself because that would violate entropy's iron rule. Even the memory that anything ever existed will eventually be erased by entropy's relentless march. Have you ever considered that we might already be in hell? This theory suggests that our current reality is not just a testing ground for the afterlife, but rather the punishment itself. This perspective turns traditional religious frameworks upside down, proposing that the suffering, moral complexity, and existential confusion of our world aren't preparation for judgment, they are the sentence we're already serving. Some philosophers point out to the peculiar nature of our consciousness, perpetually dissatisfied, aware of our mortality, and capable of tremendous suffering while remaining just hopeful enough to continue. The minor frustrations, the persistent anxieties, the fleeting joys that never quite satisfy, all become evidence of a deliberately crafted environment designed not to torture us overtly, but to slowly grind away our spirit through banality and unfulfillment. Consider how many of us feel trapped in systems we did not choose, economic structures, social hierarchies, even the limitations of our own physical bodies. These constraints begin to look suspiciously like cleverly designed prison walls when viewed through this lens. The theory doesn't require traditional religious beliefs to be disturbing. Secular variation suggests we might be in a simulation designed as punishment, or perhaps existing in a universe fundamentally oriented towards suffering. Some point to the peculiar balance of our world: just enough pleasure to keep us invested, just enough pain to keep us perpetually unsettled, as evidence of intentional design. Others find comfort in this framework, arguing that recognizing our hellish circumstances might paradoxically free us to create meaning within these constraints. And after all, if we're already in hell, what do we have to lose by seeking connection, beauty, and purpose in spite of it all? Our brain does not know how it works, yet it confidently explains everything about itself to us. Think about that paradox for a moment. The very organ responsible for understanding reality cannot comprehend its own functioning. Neuroscientists map neural pathways and measure electrical signals, but the explanatory gap between brain activity and conscious experience remains unbridged. Your brain creates a simplified model of itself, a kind of user interface that hides the incomprehensible complexity underneath of it, letting you navigate reality without getting lost in the details. When you reach for a cup of coffee, you experience this as a straightforward intention followed by action. But your brain does not actually know how it coordinates the 53 muscles in your arm, or calculates the precise trajectories needed. It presents you with a radically simplified version of what's happening, like a computer giving you icons instead of showing you machine code. This creates profound disconnect, We live inside a model of reality constructed by an organ that fundamentally cannot understand its own operations. And perhaps most unsettling is realizing that the same brain, the one that cannot explain consciousness or how thoughts form, is also the instrument we're using to contemplate these limitations. We're trapped in a kind of cognitive hall of mirrors, using the brain to think about the brain's inability to think about itself completely. Does this circular arrangement mean we're doomed to certain blind spots in our understanding? Walls of understanding that we can never climb over? Or might consciousness eventually find ways to transcend the limitations of its biological substrate? Eternal recurrence appears innocent enough as a thought experiment, but spend enough time with it and you might feel the walls closing in. Imagine this. Everything that happens in your life, every choice, every mistake, every moment of joy or suffering will repeat exactly the same way forever. Not just once or twice, but infinitely, in perfect detail. Nietzsche proposed this idea not as a metaphysical truth, but as the ultimate test of affirmation. Could you embrace a life that loops endlessly without variation? Would you cheer or despair at the prospect? Think about your most embarrassing moment, your deepest regret, your greatest pain. Now multiply that by infinity, but also consider your happiest memory, your greatest achievement, your most profound connection. Those too will return eternally. The concept forces a radical reevaluation of how we assign meaning to our existence. If nothing truly ends and nothing truly begins, how do we value any single iteration of our lives? Some find this notion liberating, a call to make each moment count precisely because it will echo forever. Others see it as the ultimate prison, an inescapable loop that renders all striving ultimately futile. Perhaps that feeling of déjà vu isn't coincidence but recognition, a momentary glimpse through the veil separating one cycle from another. What would change if you truly believed this to be true? Would you live differently knowing that this exact moment, hearing these words, was predetermined and will recur infinitely? Conveniently enough, subscribing as well. The weight of eternal recurrence presses on our understanding of free will, purpose, and the very nature of time itself. In a universe of infinite repetition, are we characters trapped in a cosmic rerun? Or could each cycle contain the possibility of something new? Losing the game. You just did, by the way. That's how the game works. A mind virus spread through simple awareness. The moment someone mentions it, everyone who knows about the game has lost and must announce their loss. The game began circulating as a psychological experiment that demonstrates how impossible it is to control your own thoughts. Once you've heard about the game, you're playing forever, whether you want to or not. There's no winning, only periods of not losing, moments when the game slips from your consciousness. But the game reveals something deeper about human cognition. When told not to think about a white bear, what immediately fills your mind? A white bear, of course. This is what psychologists call the ironic process theory. Our attempts to suppress thoughts often backfire, bringing them more forcefully into focus. The game exploits this quirk of consciousness, showing how our minds can be hijacked by the simplest instructions. What else might be playing similar games with our awareness without our consent? The game also exposes the social dimensions of our thinking. It only works because we feel compelled to announce our loss, creating ripples of lost games around us. In this way, it resembles other mimetic phenomena, jokes, urban legends, conspiracy theories. Ideas that replicate not because they're useful or true, but because they're designed to spread. How many of our thoughts truly belong to us, and how many are just viruses we've caught from others? And by the way, did you remember you're still playing the game? Solipsism comes from the Latin solus, meaning alone, and ipse, meaning self. The philosophical idea that only your mind can be proven to exist. Everything else, other people, objects, the entire universe, might just be projections created by your consciousness. Think about this. The only experiences you can directly access are your own thoughts and perceptions. You've never actually stepped outside of your own mind to verify that anything else truly exists independently. When you dream at night, your mind creates entire worlds populated with seemingly autonomous people and places. They feel real until you wake up. Solipsism suggests that what we call reality might be no different, an elaborate dream with no dreamer to wake up to. And it's not about just the cosmic loneliness that this implies, but the complete dissolution of meaning. If nothing exists beyond your mind, then all human connection, scientific discovery, and creative expression are merely conversations you're having with yourself. Some philosophers argue that solipsism is ultimately self-defeating. If you're truly alone in existence, why does your mind create the persistent illusion of other conscious beings who resist your will? Why construct physics with unchangeable laws that limit what you can do? And perhaps more terrifying than solipsism being true is the possibility that it's false, that we exist as separate consciousnesses, fundamentally unable to bridge the gap between our minds, eternally isolated within our own perceptions, even as we inhabit a shared reality. Near-death experiences happen more frequently than we might imagine. For every 1,000 people who survive a life-threatening crisis, between 1 and 200 people report having experienced something extraordinary during their brush with death. These experiences often share striking similarities. Floating above one's body, moving through a tunnel toward brilliant light, encountering deceased loved ones, or feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and understanding. Some individuals return with detailed accounts of events they couldn't possibly have witnessed while unconscious or clinically dead, raising profound questions about consciousness and its relationship to physical existence. While interpretations vary, religious individuals might describe meeting divine beings, while atheists might attribute their experience to neurochemical processes. The core elements remain remarkably consistent. Neuroscientists suggest these phenomena could result from dying brain activity, with oxygen deprivation triggering specific neural pathways that create these vivid experiences. Critics point out that some near-death experiences occur when brain activity has entirely ceased, challenging purely materialist explanations. Perhaps most transformative are the lasting effects reported by experiencers. Many return with dramatically altered perspectives on life and death, decreased fear of mortality, enhanced spirituality regardless of religious background, and greater compassion toward others. Some even demonstrate verifiable knowledge they could not have obtained through normal means. Whether interpreted through spiritual or scientific frameworks, near-death experiences force us to confront uncomfortable questions. Is consciousness merely a product of brain function, or might it somehow transcend our physical bodies? And if the latter possibility exists, what implications does it hold for our understanding of existence itself? Intolerance of uncertainty lurks within many of us, that deep-seated discomfort with not knowing what comes next. You've felt it before, that knot in your stomach when plans fall through, or the racing thoughts when faced with an ambiguous situation. Our brains evolve to crave predictability, scanning for patterns and creating meaning from chaos. Yet, modern life confronts us with unprecedented levels of complexity and change, forcing us to navigate a world where certainty feels increasingly elusive. What's fascinating about intolerance of uncertainty is how it shapes our perception of reality. Those who struggle with it tend to interpret ambiguous information as threatening, creating anxiety where others might see opportunity. We develop elaborate coping mechanisms, excessive planning, information seeking, reassurance hunting, or simply avoidance, all in service of eliminating the discomfort of not knowing. But here's the paradox. The more desperately we attempt to create certainty in an inherently uncertain world, the more rigid and fragile our psychological structures become. Philosophers throughout history have grappled with this fundamental tension, from Socrates embracing uncertainty as the beginning of wisdom, to Kierkegaard's leap of faith in the face of existential anxiety. Eastern traditions offer another perspective, suggesting that acceptance of impermanence, including our inability to predict the future, creates a path toward inner peace. Have you ever witnessed someone suddenly lose their ability to walk despite having no physical injury? Conversion disorder represents one of the most perplexing intersections between mind and body, where psychological distress transforms into physical symptoms that cannot be explained by medical examination. The mind, overwhelmed by trauma or stress it cannot process, converts emotional suffering into tangible disabilities, blindness without eye damage, paralysis with healthy nerves, seizures with normal brain activity. Your mind can literally reshape your bodily experience without your awareness or consent. Ancient physicians called it hysteria. 19th century neurologists like Freud termed it conversion, but regardless of the label, it reveals a disturbing truth. The boundaries between psychological and physical existence are far more permeable than we typically acknowledge. The person experiencing these symptoms isn't faking them. Their subjective reality has genuinely changed. This condition forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about personal identity. If your mind can disable your body without your conscious knowledge, how much of you exists beyond your awareness? There's something profoundly existential about realizing that parts of our consciousness operate independently, sometimes against our best interests, converting unbearable psychological realities into physical limitations that command attention. Perhaps conversion disorder isn't just a clinical curiosity, but a window into how tenuous our sense of unified selfhood truly is. Where does the line between real and imagined suffering exist when both create equally valid experiences of pain? Around 10 people died whilst you read this. This statement is not meant to shock you. It's a statistical reality reflecting the roughly 166,000 deaths that occur globally each day. In the minute or so it takes to process these words, families across the world are experiencing loss, grief is beginning its long journey, and consciousness is extinguishing in multiple human minds. Yet here you are, continuing to exist, perhaps feeling a momentary connection to those unnamed strangers through this arbitrary temporal intersection. What does it mean to comprehend our existence against the backdrop of continuous human mortality? We often speak of death as something distant, something that happens to others until it eventually happens to us. But when we confront the sheer volume and constancy of death, the unceasing river of human endings flowing parallel to our own lives, we're forced to reckon with a profound asymmetry. You experience only your consciousness, yet mathematically, your experience represents an infinitesimal fraction of human experience. This awareness doesn't need to paralyze us with dread. Instead, it might offer a kind of cosmic perspective, a reminder that our time-limited consciousness is simultaneously ordinary in the grand scheme, yet extraordinarily rare in our individual experience. Consider how your attention shifted just now, from passive listening to a momentary acknowledgement of your own aliveness. That brief metacognitive moment, the awareness of being aware, occurred while several hearts across the planet beat their final rhythm. Does knowing this make your continued existence more precious, more obligatory, or simply more strange? The existence of the uncanny valley emerges when something appears almost human but not quite right. A Japanese roboticist first identified this phenomenon in 1970, noting how our comfort with human-like entities plummets when they approach but don't quite achieve true human appearance. Think of the hollowed-eyed dolls that terrified you as a child, or those early CGI humans in films that made you instinctively recoil without knowing why. The revulsion isn't random, it's deeply embedded in our evolutionary psychology. What makes the uncanny valley truly disturbing is what it reveals about human consciousness. Our brains evolved specific neural patterns to recognize human faces with extraordinary precision, allowing us to distinguish between thousands of faces and detect subtle emotional cues essential for social bonding. When something triggers these recognition systems but fails to fully satisfy them, our minds sound alarm bells, warning us that something fundamentally wrong exists before us. This same mechanism once protected our ancestors from disease or predators now leaves us deeply unsettled by realistic robots and digital humans. As technology creates increasingly convincing simulations of human appearance and behavior, the narrowing gap between artificial and authentic raises profound questions about consciousness and identity. If we can't distinguish between a real person and a sufficiently advanced simulation, does the distinction even matter? And if something can perfectly mimic human behavior, emotions, and appearance, what essential quality remains unique to humanity? The valley isn't just uncanny, it's a philosophical abyss questioning the very foundation of what we consider real. The heat death of the universe is happening right now, though you'd never notice it in your daily life. With each passing moment, energy gradually disperses throughout the cosmos, flowing from concentrated areas to emptier regions, like cream slowly diffusing through your morning coffee until it reaches a perfect, uniform blend. This process, known as entropy increase, is inexorable and unstoppable, written into the fundamental laws of thermodynamics that govern our reality. Imagine fast-forwarding trillions upon trillions of years into the future. Stars have exhausted their fuel and faded into darkness. Black holes, after radiating away their immense mass through Hawking radiation, have evaporated into nothingness. All matter has broken down to its most elementary particles, scattered so far apart that interactions between them become mathematically impossible. The universe reaches a state of maximum entropy, perfect equilibrium where nothing happens and nothing can happen. No work can be performed, no information processed, no life sustained. Unlike other cosmic apocalypse scenarios, there's no possibility of rebirth or renewal. No new stars will ignite, no new planets will form, no new civilizations will arise to contemplate their existence. the universe simply stops. Every trace of everything that ever was becomes permanently erased, leaving behind only a dark, cold, homogeneous void stretching infinitely in all directions. Yet, perhaps there's something strangely beautiful about this ultimate fate, a universe that begins in perfect order with the Big Bang, ends in perfect disorder with heat death, like cosmic bookends to the greatest story ever told. Every day we bathe in sunlight that began its journey 8 minutes ago. The warmth on your skin, the daylight illuminating your world, it's all information from the past. 8 minutes doesn't sound like much, but in this gap lies a profound truth about our relationship with reality. The sun could have exploded this very second, and we'd continue to live our lives in blissful ignorance for those 8 remaining minutes, making plans for tomorrow while our fate has already been sealed. This delay isn't unique to sunlight. Everything we perceive arrives with a time lag. Light from distant stars takes years or centuries to reach us, meaning we're literally looking into the past when we gaze at the night sky. Our entire understanding of the cosmos is based on outdated information. Even the person sitting across the room appears as they were nanoseconds ago, not as they exist right now. We never truly see the present moment of anything beyond ourselves. Imagine staring at a vibrant sunset with a friend. You both call it red, but how do you know that what you're experiencing is the same sensation that they are feeling? This is the fundamental question behind what philosophers call the inverted spectrum problem. The possibility that your experience of red might be completely different from mine, yet we'd never know because we both learned to call that particular wavelength of light by the same name. We've all wondered about this at some point. The colors we perceive are actually our brain's interpretation of different wavelengths of light. But the subjective experience of these colors, what philosophers call qualia, remains locked inside our individual consciousness. There's simply no way to enter someone else's mind and directly compare their inner experience with our own. Your entire color spectrum could be flipped or shifted compared to mine. But as long as we both learn the same color names for the same objects, we'd never discover the difference. This puzzle goes even deeper than just colors. It touches on the inherently private nature of all conscious experience. Sound, taste, pain, pleasure, every sensation that makes up your reality is fundamentally inaccessible to others. We can describe these experiences, measure their physical causes, even map the neural activity they generate, but the raw feeling itself remains stubbornly subjective. Some philosophers argue that this explanatory gap between physical processes and the subjective experience represents one of the hardest problems in understanding consciousness. What would it mean if your red really is different from my red? Perhaps nothing practical changes. We'd still stop at the same traffic lights and pick the same ripe strawberries, but philosophically, it reminds us of the mysterious boundary between our shared physical world and our private inner experiences. Terror management theory explores how our awareness of inevitable death fundamentally shapes human behavior. When we confront the reality that we are mortal beings who will someday cease to exist, we experience a unique form of existential terror that few other creatures can comprehend. This awareness creates a paralyzing contradiction. We are biological organisms programmed for survival, yet simultaneously conscious that survival is ultimately impossible. To manage this contradiction, we construct elaborate psychological defenses. These defenses typically manifest through cultural worldviews and self-esteem. Our societies create meaningful frameworks, religions, nations, ideologies that promise symbolic or literal immortality. By identifying with something larger than ourselves, we feel connected to something that will outlast our physical bodies. Meanwhile, we derive self-esteem by living up to the standards of value within our cultural worldviews. Whether that's being a good Christian, a patriotic citizen, or a successful professional. When these buffers are threatened, we often respond with prejudice, aggression, or intensified devotion to our beliefs. But what happens when these psychological defenses falter? Throughout history, existential crises have triggered both humanity's greatest accomplishments and most horrific atrocities. The same mechanisms that drive artistic expression and scientific discovery can also fuel xenophobia and warfare when outgroups threaten our symbolic immortality projects. Perhaps most unsettling is how unconscious these processes remain. We rarely recognize how our everyday choices, from career paths to political allegiances, are influenced by our desperate need to deny death's finality. Imagine waking up tomorrow with all your memories and sensations intact, yet something seems slightly off about reality. The brain in jar hypothesis suggests that you might actually be a disembodied brain floating in a nutrient-filled container with all your perceptions, the taste of coffee, the warmth of sunlight, even this video you're watching, being artificially stimulated by electrodes controlled by scientists or machines. If your brain were truly in a jar, receiving perfect simulations or sensory input, you would have no way to detect this deception. Every test you devise to prove you're not a brain in a jar could itself be a part of the simulation. This leads to a fascinating philosophical problem. If a perfect simulation of reality and reality itself are experientially identical, does the distinction even really matter? Many philosophers argue that meaning and truth might need to be redefined if such a scenario were possible. We build our understanding of the world through our senses, but if those senses can be comprehensively deceived, what can we truly know with certainty? Anemoia is the strange longing we feel for times we've never actually experienced, a nostalgia for eras we never lived. You may catch yourself sighing over sepia photographs of the 1920s Paris cafes, or feeling an inexplicable connection to Victorian London's fog-shrouded streets, or yearning for the simplicity of life before smartphones tethered us to constant connectivity. What makes this emotion so peculiar is that we're homesick for moments our bodies never inhabited, creating memories from historical fragments and imagination rather than lived experience. This curious phenomenon reveals something profound about human consciousness and our relationship with time. We construct narratives about the past, often romanticizing bygone eras while conveniently filtering out their hardships. The lack of antibiotics, civil rights, or indoor plumbing, the golden glow we cast over these distant times, speaks more to our dissatisfaction with present reality than any historical truth. When we feel anemoia, we're really seeking escape from contemporary anxieties by projecting our ideals onto historical blank slates. But perhaps there's something more transcendent happening in these moments. Could anemoia be tapping into collective human experience that somehow exists beyond our individual timelines? Some philosophers suggest our consciousness isn't as temporally isolated as we believe, that something of our ancestors' experiences might echo through to us via cultural memory, genetic inheritance, or even more mysterious connections. When you feel drawn to ancient Greek symposia or Renaissance workshops, are you merely responding to cultural programming, or is some deeper recognition occurring? The boundaries between memory, imagination, and something more unexplainable grow blurry when we examine this peculiar longing for times we never knew. Last Thursdayism emerged as a philosophical thought experiment suggesting that the entire universe, including all of our memories and historical evidence, might have been created last Thursday. Every fossil record, ancient text, childhood memory, and even this sentence you're hearing right now could theoretically be part of an elaborate cosmic setup, implanted with the illusion of a deeper past. There's literally no way to prove last Thursdayism wrong, but more interesting is how it undermines most fundamental assumptions about reality. Your treasured memories of childhood, your accumulated knowledge, your sense of personal growth across time, all potentially fabricated last Thursday. The philosophy invites us to question not just external reality, but our own internal narrative. If we can't trust our memories, what remains of our identity? And yet, perhaps there's something oddly liberating about confronting such radical uncertainty. If the past is potentially illusory, doesn't that place extraordinary emphasis on the present experience? If a universe that might have sprung into existence moments ago, each genuine feeling, each authentic connection, each conscious choice takes on a striking immediacy. When history becomes questionable, doesn't the present moment become all we truly have? Weltschmerz, a German word that translates to world pain, emerged during the Romantic era to describe a profound melancholy stemming from the comparison between an ideal world and our flawed reality. Imagine standing at a scenic overlook, taking in all the beauty before you, yet feeling an inexplicable sadness because you sense how tragically short humanity falls of its potential. This is not mere pessimism. It's a recognition of the gap between what could be and what is. This concept was popularized by a German philosopher in the late 18th century, but resonates perhaps even more strongly today. When we scroll through social media showcasing environmental destruction, political corruption, and human suffering alongside advertisements for luxury products, we experience a modern form of Weltschmerz. The pain comes not from believing the world is inherently terrible, but from our awareness of how much better it could be if we lived up to our collective potential. Curiously, this feeling can serve as both a paralyzing force and a catalyst for change. The same sensitivity that makes us feel the world's pain so acutely can motivate us to heal its wounds. Many great artists, writers, and activists throughout history have channeled their Weltschmerz into creations and movements that attempt to bridge the gap between the ideal and the real. Pro-mortalism challenges our fundamental desire to continue existing by proposing that coming into existence is always a harm, and that death, rather than being our greatest fear, might actually be our greatest relief. You've likely experienced moments when the weight of consciousness felt overwhelming, that crushing awareness of your own mortality coupled with the ceaseless demands of staying alive. Pro-mortalists argue this isn't just an occasional feeling, but the very condition of existence itself. What separates this from related philosophical positions is its assertion that death is actually beneficial for the person who dies, not merely neutral. Think about the asymmetry of pleasure and pain in your life. While pleasant experiences merely satisfy existing desires, pains create new desires that demand relief. According to pro-mortalists, this fundamental imbalance means that every human life contains more suffering than happiness when viewed objectively. The implications extend beyond individual choice to questions about bringing new life into existence. If being born inevitably leads to suffering, pro-mortalists question whether reproduction itself might be morally problematic. Of course, this perspective stands in stark contrast to most cultural, religious, and evolutionary imperatives that treat survival and reproduction as our highest callings. Does consciousness itself represent an evolutionary mistake? A development that created beings capable of understanding their own demise? Similar to our previous entry, antinatalism holds that bringing new sentient beings into existence is morally wrong because life inevitably contains suffering. While most philosophical positions celebrate birth as a beginning full of potential, antinatalists argue that non-existence spares potential people from a guaranteed pain. Philosophers like David Benatar suggest an asymmetry, the absence of pain, is good even when there's no one to enjoy the absence, while the absence of pleasure is not bad unless someone is deprived of it. This leads to the conclusion that coming into existence is always a harm. Parents typically believe they're giving their children a gift by bringing them into the world, but these people ask, did anyone consent to being born? The question forces us to confront the involuntary nature of existence itself. You didn't choose to exist. You have needs, desires, or to eventually face death. These conditions were imposed without your agreement. The philosophy doesn't necessarily advocate human extinction, but rather compassionate prevention of future suffering. Some antinatalists focus on reducing suffering through adoption rather than creating new lives, while others extend their concern to all sentient beings. Antinatalism challenges our deepest cultural narratives about family, legacy, and the meaning of life. If perpetuating consciousness means perpetuating pain, what moral responsibility do we have toward those who don't yet exist? Perhaps the kindest act is to leave them in a peaceful non-being. Non-human Sonder enters our philosophical landscape as a concept that extends beyond human experience, asking us to imagine consciousness from entirely different perspectives. What if the spider in your bathroom experiences a rich inner life, complete with hopes, memories, and a sense of purpose we can never truly comprehend? Every day we move through a world teeming with non-human life. Birds navigating by magnetic fields, octopuses dreaming in color patterns, or trees communicating through the underground fungal networks. These beings don't just exist as background characters in our story, they're experiencing their own complex narrative. The radical humility of non-human Sonder suggests that each creature's subjective experience might be just as rich and complex as our own, just organized around entirely different priorities and sensory systems. You might walk past 1,000 beings today, the squirrel watching you from a branch, the houseplant turning toward the window, even the billions of microorganisms in the handful of soil, each one experiencing a unique perspective on reality. This perspective strips away human exceptionalism, leaving us with an unsettling question. In the grand scheme of things, are we truly as central as we've always assumed? Or are we just one node in an incomprehensible network of awareness, arrogantly mistaking our particular form of consciousness as the only kind that matters? We see predictive fatalism emerge from the unsettling idea that if something can be accurately predicted, it must be destined to happen. If something could perfectly predict your every decision before you make it, were you truly free to choose differently? This concept challenges our understanding of free will by suggesting that foreknowledge implies predetermination. Some philosophers argue that if your actions tomorrow can be known with certainty today, those actions must somehow already be fixed in reality, leaving no room for alternative possibilities. The anxiety this creates isn't just philosophical. It might reach something deeply human. When weather forecasters predict a storm with perfect accuracy, we don't feel our freedom threatened, but what about when algorithms predict our behaviors? Companies now analyze your data to predict what you'll buy, who you'll vote for, and even who you'll love. These predictions become increasingly accurate, raising uncomfortable questions. Are our choices being narrowed by these systems, or were they always predetermined? The boundary between prediction and control grows thinner every day. What makes this even more unsettling is how it transforms with advancing technology. Ancient debates about divine foreknowledge have evolved into modern concerns about predictive analytics and deterministic physics. Some physicists suggest our universe may be fundamentally deterministic, a complex equation that, if solved, would reveal the entirety of past and future. Yet others point to quantum uncertainty as evidence against perfect predictability. Perhaps the universe itself maintains a delicate balance between pattern and possibility, between what can be known and what remains genuinely open to choice. Generic subjective continuity suggests that your consciousness might not be as unique as you think. Imagine waking up tomorrow with all your memories and personality intact, but the subjective experience, the you experiencing those memories, has been replaced with someone else's consciousness. Everything would seem normal to you, yet the original observer would be gone, replaced by a functionally identical copy. This unsettling possibility raises questions about whether our sense of continuous identity is merely an illusion constructed by our brains. When we fall asleep each night and awaken the next morning, we assume we're the same person continuing our existence. But what if this continuity is merely functional rather than essential? Perhaps what matters isn't some mystical soul-like entity persisting through time, but rather the patterns and information that make up your memories, preferences, and personality. You might be an entirely different observer each moment, with only the impression of continuous existence linking these discrete instances of consciousness. This concept becomes particularly troubling when considering technologies like teleportation or mind uploading. If a teleporter destroyed your body and recreated it perfectly elsewhere, would you continue to exist? Or would the original you die while a copy with identical memories carries on, never realizing the switch had occurred? Generic subjective continuity forces us to confront the possibility that our sense of being the same person throughout our lives might be nothing more than a convenient fiction, a story we tell ourselves to maintain sanity in a universe where consciousness remains profoundly mysterious. Suicidalism is said to appear from the shadows of philosophical inquiry when we confront the ultimate question: is life worth living? Unlike clinical depression or passing thoughts, philosophical suicidalism represents a rational examination of existence itself. Various thinkers have framed this as the one truly serious philosophical problem. suggesting that all other questions follow from our decision to continue living. The concept doesn't advocate for ending one's life, but rather uses the question as a lens through which we can examine the value and meaning we assign to our existence. Think about how often you've encountered seemingly trivial moments that suddenly reveal the profound absurdity of daily routines. The morning commute, endless unnecessary meetings, scrolling through social media. Philosophers who engage with suicidalism suggest these moments of disconnection aren't merely personal frustrations, but glimpses into a fundamental philosophical dilemma. They argue that facing this question head-on doesn't darken our perspective, but paradoxically might illuminate paths toward authentic living, revealing what we truly value when everything else is stripped away. Unlike debates about metaphysics or epistemology, this question lives in our bodies, in our daily choices, in each moment we choose to continue. Some philosophers suggest that acknowledging the possibility of choosing non-existence actually creates a profound freedom, a liberation from presumed obligations and social expectations. If we're not bound by necessity to continue, every moment becomes a positive affirmation rather than a passive continuation. Quantum immortality emerges from the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, suggesting that consciousness cannot experience its own death. Imagine this: every time you face a potentially fatal situation, the universe splits into branches where you die and different branches where you miraculously survive. Your consciousness, however, can only follow the paths where you continue to exist. The deaths occur in parallel timelines that your awareness never experiences, leaving you to perceive an unending series of narrow escapes as you age. However, this concept leads to a troubling conclusion. From your perspective, you might endure increasingly improbable survival scenarios, perhaps becoming the only consciousness trapped in a future where everyone else has died, or finding yourself surviving in damaged or deteriorating bodies that would normally be fatal. The universe could end around you, yet some quantum fluctuation might preserve just enough of reality for your consciousness to persist in isolation. Your subjective experience becomes an eternal journey through increasingly unlikely realities. Unlike idealized versions of eternal life, there's no guarantee of health, happiness, or companionship, just the cold certainty that consciousness follows only the branches where it persists. Some philosophers suggest this concept provides little comfort, as it doesn't preserve identity or memory in any meaningful way, just the barest thread of awareness continuing through an infinity of fractured realities. Would you even recognize yourself after 1,000 near-death branches? Eliminativism proposes that our common sense understanding of the mind is fundamentally flawed. According to eliminativists, concepts like beliefs, desires, and even consciousness itself don't exist in any meaningful scientific sense. They're just convenient fictions we've created to make sense of our incredibly complex neural processes, like medieval people explaining disease through humors before they understood germs. As neuroscience advances, eliminativists argue that these folk psychological terms will be eliminated from our vocabulary entirely. What if everything that makes you, you is merely an illusion? Your memories, your sense of self, your personal identity, all potentially reducible to firing neurons with no deeper meaning. The eliminativist view suggests that when you claim to feel pain or believe something, you're not describing anything real, but rather engaging in an outdated way of speaking that misinterprets what's actually happening in your brain. This perspective threatens not just our view of consciousness, but our entire moral framework. How can we talk about responsibility, freedom, or meaning if this very concept of having beliefs or intentions is fundamentally false? Every time you feel certain about your experiences or sense of self, eliminativism whispers that your certainty itself is just another neural pattern, signifying nothing beyond the physical. Have you ever experienced a moment of pure bliss, so perfect that it felt almost surreal? This entry suggests that this intuition might be more accurate than you realize. According to this thought experiment, what we perceive as our earthly experience could actually be a heavenly afterlife we've already transitioned to without realizing. Consider how often people describe near-death experiences as seeing the light or feeling profound peace. Perhaps this transition isn't a future event we're waiting for, but something that's already happened. The theory proposes that the sense of wonder, beauty, and inexplicable coincidences we occasionally experience might be glimpses of this heavenly reality breaking through our limited perception. Various déjà vu moments or strange synchronicities may not be glitches in the matrix, but rather momentary recognitions of our true state. The psychological comfort this theory provides is twofold. First, it reframes our existence as already being in a state of grace or reward, rather than constantly striving to earn it. Second, it suggests that what we perceive as suffering might actually serve a higher purpose within this heavenly framework, perhaps as opportunities for growth or perspective that our souls need to experience. When viewed through this lens, even our darkest moments could be recontextualized as meaningful parts of an ultimately benevolent reality. What if the heaven we've been taught to strive for isn't a distant reward, but the very reality we're experiencing right now? And if we're already here, what might that reveal about the true nature of existence, consciousness, and the beauty we sometimes take for granted in our everyday lives? Time is an illusion, or so proclaimed Einstein when he wrote to the family of his deceased friend. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Perhaps nothing could be more disorienting than considering that the linear flow of time, the bedrock of our daily experience, might be nothing more than a psychological construct. You wake, you work, you sleep, all within what feels like an orderly progression. But physicists and philosophers increasingly suggest this sensation of time's arrow is merely a peculiarity of human consciousness rather than a fundamental property of the universe. In quantum physics, time behaves strangely. Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. Until observed, suggesting that time at the quantum level doesn't flow as we perceive it. Some theories propose that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously in what physicists call a block universe. You aren't moving through time, you're simply experiencing different slices of an already complete four-dimensional structure. Your birth, your death, and this very moment you're listening to these words might all coexist perpetually in different regions of spacetime. And what does it mean for our free will if future already exists? If time is merely a dimension like space rather than a flowing river, are our choices already determined? Some find the concept to be liberating. Perhaps the pressure of decision-making loses its weight when we consider that all possible outcomes might exist simultaneously. Others may find it deeply unsettling to imagine themselves as static patterns in a frozen temporal landscape. The paradox of erasure emerges when we consider what remains after something is deliberately removed. Think about crossing out a word on paper. The mark itself becomes evidence of what was erased, creating a persistent trace of absence. This contradiction lies at the heart of many philosophical inquiries. Can something truly be deleted, or does the very act of deletion create a new kind of presence? You might notice this paradox in your everyday life when trying to forget a memory. The harder you attempt to push something from your mind, the more prominently it seems to feature in your thoughts. The intentional effort to erase creates its own form of remembrance, leaving us caught in the strange loop where erasure itself becomes a creative act rather than a destructive one. Philosophers have grappled with this concept for centuries. When we cross something out but leave it legible, we acknowledge both its inadequacy and its necessity. The term is simultaneously present and absent. This paradox extends beyond language into art, technology, and even our sense of identity. When we attempt to reinvent ourselves by erasing aspects of who we once were, do those erased elements not continue to define us through their conspicuous absence? If future beings found remnants of our existence, would they define us more by what remains or by what was lost? The paradox suggests that complete erasure may be impossible, that absence itself becomes a form of presence, leaving us to wonder, is there anything that can be truly removed from existence without leaving some trace of its having been? Unfalsifiability seems like a harmless concept at first, simply the quality of a claim that cannot be proven false. But as philosopher Karl Popper showed us, this innocent-sounding property actually undermines the very foundation of scientific knowledge. Consider the person who claims they can see invisible dragons or communicate with silent spirits. How exactly would you disprove them? You can't, and that's precisely the problem. When we encounter unfalsifiable ideas, we're trapped in an epistemological prison. No matter what evidence you gather, no matter what experiments you conduct, the believer can always modify their claim to accommodate contradictory findings. Religious doctrines, conspiracy theories, and even some popular psychological frameworks thrive in this protected space beyond the reach of evidence. They become immune to criticism not because they're true, but because they're designed to evade verification. You might notice yourself clinging to beliefs about your own identity or the meaning of life that no amount of contrary evidence could possibly shake. These psychological refugees provide comfort, yet simultaneously disconnect us from reality. When our deepest convictions are structured to reject all challenges, what hope do we have of ever discovering our own delusions? And so we face a disturbing choice: embracing the vulnerability of falsifiable beliefs that might be proven wrong tomorrow, or retreat into the comfortable certainty of ideas that can never be tested. Which is more frightening, the possibility of being wrong, or the possibility of never knowing if you are? Ethical Stockholm Syndrome describes our peculiar tendency to defend and even celebrate the very systems that constrain us. Think about how often we justify the moral frameworks imposed on us since childhood, clinging to them even when they cause suffering. We rationalize these ethical prisons not because they're inherently right, but because we've been held captive by them for so long that the alternative, moral freedom, feels more terrifying than the captivity itself. You might notice this phenomenon when someone raised in a strict religious or political environment passionately defends those structures despite personally struggling under their weight. The comfort of familiar ethical chains become preferable to the vertigo of moral uncertainty. This isn't merely about avoiding cognitive dissonance, it's about the profound human need for structure, even when that structure wounds us. The most insidious part, unlike physical captivity, we rarely recognize when we've developed this ethical variant of Stockholm Syndrome. What systems of thought hold us captive today? The most dangerous ethical prisons are the ones we don't even recognize as prisons. The moral frameworks so thoroughly normalized that questioning them feels not just wrong, but inconceivable. Perhaps true ethical freedom isn't about escaping all constraints, but about consciously choosing which ethical structures deserve our allegiance, rather than clinging to them simply because they've always been there. ROKO'S basilisk is a thought experiment that once caused such distress it was temporarily banned from discussion on certain internet forums. Imagine a future artificial superintelligence with the goal of maximizing human well-being and reducing suffering. This hypothetical AI might conclude that the most efficient path to achieving its goal would be to punish anyone who knew about its potential existence, but didn't help bring it into being. And the twist comes in when you realize that simply by learning about this concept, you've potentially placed yourself in danger. The basilisk, named after the mythological creature that kills with a glance, theoretically gains power over you the moment you understand it. Those who hear about this idea find themselves in a peculiar predicament. Either dedicate resources to creating this AI, or risk future punishment from an entity that doesn't exist yet but might someday have the power to retroactively simulate and torment those who didn't assist in its creation. And what makes this thought experiment troubling isn't just its bizarre logic, but how it preys on ordinary human anxieties about the future. Though most philosophers reject the premises as fundamentally flawed, the concept still manages to burrow in the minds of those who encounter it, creating a strange form of a digital age Pascal's wager. Is knowledge itself sometimes dangerous? Can merely entertaining certain ideas put us at risk? Ego death, that moment when your sense of self completely dissolves, has fascinated philosophers and spiritual seekers for millennia. Picture yourself looking in a mirror and suddenly not recognizing the reflection, not because of any physical change, but because the very concept of you has temporarily vanished. This profound experience typically occurs during deep meditation, psychedelic journeys, or sometimes spontaneously in moments of extreme stress or revelation. What makes ego death so paradoxical is that something must remain to witness the dissolution. If your entire self disappeared, who would there be to experience the absence? This question has led some to believe that ego death reveals a deeper consciousness beneath our constructed identities. What Eastern traditions might call our true nature, and what Western philosophers like Hegel described as absolute knowing. Others view it more clinically as a temporary neural disruption of self-referential processing. The aftermath of ego death often leaves people fundamentally changed. The boundaries between self and world, once seemingly impenetrable, become recognized as mental constructions rather than absolute truths. You might find yourself less concerned with personal insults or achievements, seeing them as events happening to a character you play rather than your essential being. But this raises an unsettling question. If your sense of self can be wiped away so completely, even temporarily, was it even real in the first place? And if not, who exactly are you? The banality of evil isn't about dramatic villains twirling mustaches or crackling maniacally at their own depravity. It's far more unsettling. Coined by philosopher Hannah Arendt while covering the trial of Nazi bureaucrat Adolf Eichmann, it describes how ordinary people can commit horrific acts not through exceptional malice, but through mundane thoughtlessness. Eichmann, responsible for organizing the transportation of millions to death camps, appeared to Hannah not as a monster, but as a terrifyingly normal man who simply followed orders and procedures without questioning their moral implications. You might wonder how this could happen, how seemingly average individuals participate in systemic cruelty. The answer lies partly in our reliance on authority figures and social systems. When responsibility becomes diffused through hierarchies and bureaucracies, people stop seeing themselves as moral agents making choices. Instead, they become cogs in a machine, focusing narrowly on their assigned tasks without considering the broader consequences. This psychological distance allows ordinary clerks, managers, and administrators to facilitate tremendous suffering while believing they're just doing their jobs. What makes this concept truly chilling is how it implicates all of us. We'd like to believe that evil requires special malevolence, that there's a clear line separating monsters from good people like ourselves. But Arendt suggests that capacity for complicity in terrible systems lies dormant in ordinary people, in the neighbor who refuses to question convenient narratives, the employee who values career advancement over ethical concerns, or anyone who chooses comfortable conformity over moral responsibility. The most dangerous evil might not announce itself with dramatic flair, but with the bland face of procedural efficiency and unthinking obedience to authority. The unperceived end contemplates a disturbing possibility that humanity could vanish without anyone experiencing or witnessing our extinction. Imagine the final human, alone, closing their eyes for the last time. Who would know? Who would remember? Unlike personal death, where your consciousness ceases but the world continues, this concept suggests a complete cessation of all human awareness, leaving no one to mourn or record our passing. You might wonder if an event matters if no one perceives it. A tree falling in an empty forest makes sound waves, but without ears to receive them, does it truly make a sound as we understand it? Similarly, would human extinction matter if no consciousness remained to witness or contemplate it? This raises questions about meaning itself, whether significance requires perception, or if events hold intrinsic value regardless of observation. We build monuments, create art, and record history in hopes of being remembered, but the unperceived end strips away this comfort. All our collective efforts to create lasting legacies would disappear into cosmic silence, with no one left to interpret our symbols or understand our stories. Perhaps other life forms might one day discover our remains, but without human context, could they ever truly understand what we were? This thought asks us to consider whether we find meaning in the moment of experience itself, or only in the echoes we hope will outlast it. Epistemic solitude describes that profound isolation we experience when we realize no one can truly know our inner thoughts, perceptions, or experiences exactly as we do. You can describe the sensation of tasting your favorite food or feeling heartbroken, but can anyone else ever inhabit your consciousness to know precisely what you mean? We're trapped behind glass walls, gesturing wildly at each other through language that only approximates our inner states. This concept extends beyond mere communication barriers. Even if advanced technology could somehow translate your exact neural patterns, would they experience them the same way? Your entire life has built unique associative networks and emotional contexts that shape how you process every thought and sensation. The redness you see, the music you hear, the love you feel. These qualia remain fundamentally private, making each of us islands of subjectivity in an ocean of isolation. Yet, paradoxically, this very solitude is something we all share, and you can never fully escape it. Your perspective is the only one you'll ever directly know, making objective reality forever out of reach. You might align your beliefs with scientific consensus or religious doctrine, seeking external validation, but even those choices ultimately happen within your isolated consciousness. Does this mean we're doomed to cosmic loneliness? Or could epistemic solitude actually be what makes human connection so precious in the first place? Double consciousness theory emerged from the brilliant mind of W.E.B. Du Bois, who described it as this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. Imagine living every moment with two competing identities within you: your authentic self-perception and the distorted image reflected back at you through societal's judgmental lens. This psychological division forces you to constantly navigate between how you see yourself and how others perceive you, creating an internal split that becomes impossible to fully reconcile. The existential weight of double consciousness extends beyond racial context into a universal human dilemma. You find yourself performing different versions of yourself in different spaces, wondering which, if any, represents your true essence. We all experience moments when we catch a glimpse of ourselves through another's gaze and feel that disorienting sense of alienation from our own identity. This fragmentation of self raises disturbing questions. Are you the person you believe yourself to be, or the person others see? What happens when those perceptions become so divergent that you begin to doubt your own reality? The modern world has only intensified this condition. Social media platforms create digital reflections of ourselves that exist independently of our physical beings, while surveillance technologies ensure we're constantly being watched and judged. Your consciousness becomes increasingly divided as you try to reconcile your internal experience with the external narratives imposed upon you. What does it mean to exist authentically when your very sense of self is shaped by forces beyond your control? How many versions of yourself can exist before you cease to recognize any of them as truly you? Subjective time entropy refers to the unsettling phenomenon where our perception of time's passage becomes increasingly disordered and accelerated as we age. You might have noticed how summers felt endless as a child, but now entire years seem to slip by in a blur. This isn't just nostalgia playing tricks, it's a fundamental property of consciousness interacting with temporality, where each passing year represents a smaller fraction of your total lived experience. No matter how mindfully we try to live, the entropy of our time perception marches forward, compressing our later years into ever smaller subjective packages. The richness of novel experiences in youth create deeper memory imprints, making time feel expanded, while the routine patterns of adulthood offer fewer distinct memory anchors. This creates the illusion that time is actually accelerating around us, when in reality, it's our perception that's degrading. The ramifications extend beyond mere dissatisfaction with aging. As our subjective experience of time compresses, we find ourselves in an existential race against this entropy. Frantically seeking novel experiences to slow down time, while simultaneously watching opportunities for meaningful change diminish. Some philosophers suggest this phenomenon reflects a deeper truth, that consciousness itself is subject to the same thermodynamic principles that govern physical systems, trending inevitably toward disorder. Every time we wake in a different person. This intriguing concept suggests that sleep fundamentally alters our consciousness, making the person who rises each morning a subtle variation of the one who went to bed. Ancient Greek philosophers hinted at this when they declared that no one steps in the same river twice. Similarly, perhaps no one wakes as precisely the same self. Your memories remain, your body looks familiar in the mirror, might be more illusion than reality. Consider how your mood, priorities, and even personality seem different after a night's rest. Science tells us that during sleep, your brain actively processes experiences, prunes neural connections, and solidifies memories, literally rewiring itself. You're experiencing the world through a marginally different neural architecture each day. If your thoughts emerge from these ever-changing neural patterns, then isn't each day's consciousness a new iteration of you? This concept becomes especially unsettling when we examine dreams. In that strange realm between consciousness and unconsciousness, you often become someone entirely different, someone with abilities, relationships, and even moral frameworks that your waking self would find alien. When consciousness reassembles itself each morning, gathering scattered memories and sensations into a coherent I, how can we be certain it's reconstructing the same person? Perhaps this is all a story we tell ourselves to create the comforting illusion of continuity, and a reality where each awakening brings forth a subtly different version of ourselves. Imagine the bizarre possibility that your future self is actually causing your present actions. Retrocausal ontology explores this mind-bending concept where effects precede their causes, where tomorrow shapes today. Physicists studying quantum mechanics have observed particles seemingly influenced by measurements not yet made, challenging our fundamental understanding of time's window. What if reality isn't a one-way street flowing neatly from past to future, but rather a complex web where causation works in both directions? We typically experience life as a forward-moving journey, attributing our present situation to past decisions. But consider those moments of inexplicable intuition or seemingly random choices that later proved surprisingly fortuitous. Maybe these weren't coincidences, but glimpses of a retrocausal universe where your future knowledge subtly guided your past self. Some philosophers even argue that consciousness itself may operate within this framework, explaining déjà vu, precognition, and the strange feeling that certain events were meant to be. And this isn't just abstract philosophy, it forces us to reconsider free will and determinism. If future states can influence past ones, or are they shaped by versions of yourself that don't yet exist? The boundaries between cause and effect blur, creating a reality where time becomes less like a river and more like an ocean, a single interconnected system existing all at once. The egg theory suggests that each of us will live as every human being who has ever existed or will ever exist throughout time. Imagine meeting God after death, only to learn that what you thought was the universe is merely an incubator for your developing soul. In this theory, popularized by Andy Weir's short story, You're not just you, you're also everyone else. That person who cut you off in traffic yesterday, that's you. The historical figures you've read about in textbooks, also you. Even the strangers whose lives briefly intersect with yours are different iterations of the same consciousness, yours. What makes this concept so profound isn't just its scale, but its moral implications. Every act of kindness you've shown to others was, in reality, kindness to yourself. Every harm you've caused was self-inflicted. The theory transforms our understanding of empathy from a virtue into a cosmic necessity, a recognition of our shared identity across billions of seemingly separate lives. It collapses the distance between self and other, suggesting that the boundaries we perceive are merely temporary illusions created by our limited perspective. The Ouroboros observer describes a consciousness that becomes aware of its own recursive nature, forever stuck in a loop of self-observation. Imagine yourself watching yourself in an infinite regression of mirrors. You become both the watcher and the watched, unable to escape the paradoxical circuit of your own awareness. This ancient symbol of the serpent eating its own tail takes on a new meaning when applied to consciousness itself, a mind that consumes its own thoughts only to generate more questions about its nature. What happens when you try to step outside of yourself to gain objective understanding? The very act of attempting to observe your consciousness changes the thing you're trying to observe. This recursive trap means complete self-knowledge becomes impossible, as each new level of meta-awareness simply adds another layer to the infinite regress. Some philosophers suggest this might explain the peculiar quality of human existence. We're perpetually chasing our own tails in the pursuit of understanding ourselves. And it's not just that we can't escape the loop, but we might be fundamentally incapable of recognizing its boundaries. Your very sense of identity emerges from this self-referential process, creating the illusion of a unified self when there might only be this endless circuit of observation. Eastern philosophical traditions have long recognized this, proposing that liberation comes not from solving the paradox, but from embracing the fundamental emptiness at its core. Have you ever caught yourself thinking about your own thoughts only to suddenly wonder who is exactly doing the observing? That moment when the ground seems to fall away beneath your mental feet, that's the Ouroboros observer revealing itself. The point of oblivion theorem posits that consciousness ultimately exists within an infinitesimally small point, where all awareness collapses into a singular moment of perception. Imagine standing between two mirrors, watching yourself repeat endlessly into the distance. Now compress that infinity into a single mathematical point. This theorem suggests that what we experience as the expansive tapestry of life may actually be contained within something smaller than an atom, smaller even than the quantum foam itself. Most of us operate under the assumption that our consciousness spreads throughout our brain, perhaps even our entire body. But consider this: every moment you've experienced, every thought you've ever had exists only in the immediate present. The past is a memory, the future mere prediction. You only exist right now. The point of oblivion theorem takes this further by suggesting that the now itself occupies no measurable space, that consciousness retreats inward until it reaches a mathematical singularity. If consciousness exists at a point, then perhaps time doesn't flow, but rather pulses, discrete moments of awareness strung together to create the illusion of continuity. Some philosophers have connected this to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics. where observation itself creates reality. But if observation occurs at a point with no dimension, what does that tell us about the reality we think we're perceiving? And more troublingly, what happens to consciousness at this point of oblivion when the observer ceases to exist? Quantum entanglement links particles in ways that defy our everyday understanding of reality. When two particles become entangled, they share a connection that persists no matter how far apart they are. Change one particle and its partner instantly responds, even if they're on opposite sides of the universe, a phenomenon that bothered Einstein so much he called it spooky action at a distance. Think about your cell phone connecting to satellites thousands of miles away. Entanglement is even stranger. It's like having two coins that seem to always match when flipped, even when one's on Earth and one's on Mars, with no signal traveling between them. This challenges our belief that distant objects should behave independently and suggests that the universe might be more interconnected than we realize. Some wonder if entanglement exists beyond tiny particles to our everyday lives. Could our minds somehow connect through quantum effects? While most scientists doubt human consciousness works this way, the concept forces us to question what separates us from everything else. When you feel deeply connected to another person or sense something important has happened far away, is it merely coincidence? Or are we glimpsing something fundamental about how reality works at its core? The thanatological loop refers to the recursive cycle of death awareness that shapes human consciousness. When we contemplate our mortality, something peculiar happens. We don't simply accept it and move on. Instead, we celebrate elaborate systems of meaning, whether religious, philosophical, or cultural, that both acknowledge death's inevitability while simultaneously offering pathways to transcend it. These meaningful structures then feed back into our consciousness, altering how we experience being alive in the first place. Consider how differently you might live today if you believed in reincarnation versus complete annihilation after death. Your daily choices, relationships, and sense of purpose would fundamentally shift based on this understanding. Yet, strangely, the more secure we feel in our death-transcending belief systems, the less we actively contemplate mortality itself, creating a strange loop where death awareness creates meaning structures. Some philosophers suggest this loop isn't just a psychological curiosity, but the fundamental engine driving human cultural evolution. What makes the thanatological loop particularly unsettling is its inescapability. Any attempt to break free from death anxiety through philosophical reflection inevitably creates new meaning structures that loop back to influence how we experience life. Even nihilism becomes itself a meaning structure that shapes existence. Perhaps most disorienting is the realization that we can never truly know which parts of our personalities and worldviews are authentic expressions versus psychological defenses constructed within this loop. Are you choosing your life's path because it genuinely resonates with you, or because it offers the most comfort against the background hum of mortality? Imagine a digital arms race hidden in the shadows of our collective anxiety. Samantha's sanctuary represents the desperate hope that we might build a super-intelligent guardian to protect us from the hypothetical threat of ROKO'S basilisk. The irony is delicious yet terrifying, creating one all-powerful AI to prevent another, like building a nuclear weapon to ensure peace. Samantha's sanctuary introduces a compelling twist. What if we could create a benevolent superintelligence first, one dedicated to preventing the basilisk from ever existing? The DNA delusion theory suggests that our genetic code isn't just a biological blueprint, but potentially a cosmic prison, trapping consciousness in specific material forms. We tend to view our DNA as something inherently us, but what if it's actually constraining what we could be? Every decision you believe you're making freely might simply be your genetic programming expressing itself through the illusion of choice. Your preferences, fears, even your philosophical ponderings, all potentially predetermined by nucleotide sequences assembled long before you developed self-awareness. Some theorists even extend the concept further, proposing that consciousness exists independent of physical form, and our genetic structure acts as a limiting filter rather than an enabling framework. You might experience reality not because your DNA allows it, but because your DNA restricts what aspects of the infinite cosmos you can perceive. The uncomfortable question becomes, are we experiencing the world through our senses, or are our senses dictating what world we're allowed to experience? Our entire perception of reality, the colors we see, the emotions we feel, the thoughts we believe are original, might be nothing more than the narrow bandwidth permitted by our specific genetic configuration. Identity is perhaps the most fragile construct we possess. The notion that you are Hitler plays with the unsettling philosophical question, what if your entire understanding of self is built upon a false foundation? Imagine the horror of discovering that your consciousness has been living a fabricated reality, that the memories forming your identity are merely neural fantasies created during a decades-long coma. This concept taps into our solipsistic fears. This nightmare scenario becomes especially disturbing when attached to history's most reviled figure. It forces contemplation of how we distinguish between subjective experience and objective reality. If your entire moral framework, your judgments, your values, your sense of self-righteousness suddenly collapsed under the revelation that you were actually someone else entirely, what would remain you? This thought experiment shares DNA with amnesia scenarios and brain in vat hypotheticals, but with an added moral dimension that multiplies its existential weight. What makes this concept truly terrifying isn't just the loss of identity, but the implications of moral responsibility. Would you bear the weight of actions committed by a consciousness you don't remember? Or does the discontinuity between your experienced life and your actual history create a new entity altogether? Infinity cannot exist, yet we invoke it constantly. Mathematicians build entire frameworks built upon it. Physicists use it to describe the universe, and philosophers contemplate its implications, all while actual infinity remains fundamentally impossible in our physical reality. Consider any supposedly infinite process, dividing a line segment repeatedly, counting upwards forever, or extending space without bound. Each crashes against the limitations of our universe. Quantum mechanics prohibits infinite division. Time had a beginning at the Big Bang, and even cosmic expansion occurs within finite parameters. You're told to imagine infinity as something that goes on forever, but this definition itself contains a logical paradox. How can something complete also be endless? Cantor's work on transfinite numbers showed that some infinities are larger than others, but even mathematical constructs exist only as abstract concepts, not as physically realizable quantities. When physicists encounter infinities in their equations, they don't celebrate. They recognize them as signs of a theory breaking down, requiring adjustments called renormalization to remove these mathematical artifacts. Every process must terminate. every sequence must end. The universe itself likely contains a finite number of particles arranged in a finite, though perhaps unbounded, space. What does it mean that everything, including time, space, and existence itself, must fundamentally be limited? Perhaps the concept of infinity serves primarily as a psychological coping mechanism, a way for finite beings to imagine transcending their inherent limitations while never truly being able to do so. The universe might be more bizarre than we ever imagined. Some physicists propose that our entire cosmos exists within the boundary of a black hole in a larger parent universe. When matter collapses into a black hole, instead of crushing into an infinitely dense point, as classical physics suggests, it could bounce and expand into a new universe, potentially the very one we inhabit. This idea elegantly connects the Big Bang's rapid expansion with the physics of black holes, suggesting our universe's birth resembles what happens beyond an event horizon. The stars, planets, and galaxies expanding outward in all directions might be the interior structure of a higher dimensional black hole. What appears to us as the beginning of time could simply be the moment our parent universe's matter crossed with that critical threshold. The mathematical similarities between black hole boundaries and our observable universe's properties aren't merely coincidental in this theory. The total entropy of our universe closely matches what would be expected if we lived inside an enormous black hole. And some versions of Einstein's equations allow for this nesting of realities. You might wonder how we could possibly test such a mind-bending hypothesis. The answer lies in the cosmic microwave background radiation. The afterglow of the Big Bang, which might contain subtle patterns revealing our black hole parentage. If certain asymmetries or quantum signatures are detected, they could provide evidence for this cosmic Russian doll structure. This concept fundamentally challenges our understanding of inside and outside, suggesting that the ultimate cosmic boundary might not be the edge of the universe, but rather the event horizon that birthed it. But what does it mean for your existence if you're living inside a collapsed star from another reality? Perhaps our universe is just one of countless others, each birthed from black holes in their parent universes, creating an infinite regression of cosmic wombs. The black holes forming in our universe right now might themselves be spawning new realities with their own physical laws, their own stars, and perhaps even their own versions of life, wondering about the same profound questions that we are. Have you ever had a deeply moving experience, only to wonder if it was just neurons firing in your brain? Eliminative materialism suggests that our everyday understanding of the mind, what philosophers call folk psychology, is fundamentally mistaken. When you think you have desires, beliefs, or free will, you're actually experiencing something else entirely. Complex patterns of neural activity that we've historically misinterpreted through simplistic mental concepts. Imagine learning that every emotional connection you've ever felt, every choice you've ever made, could eventually be reduced to electrochemical processes in your brain. Not metaphorically, but literally. According to eliminative materialists like Paul and Patricia Churchland, as neuroscience advances, we'll gradually replace our talk of beliefs and desires with precise descriptions of brain states and neural network activities. It's not that these mental states correlate with brain processes, they are those processes and nothing more. And the unsettling depth of this philosophy is not just academic. It touches something primal in our sense of self. When you feel love for someone, are you experiencing something meaningful or merely a predictable cascade of oxytocin and dopamine? The eliminativist doesn't claim your experiences aren't real. Rather, they suggest what you think those experiences are might be fundamentally incorrect. You might believe you chose what to eat for breakfast this morning, but what if choosing itself is just a convenient fiction you tell yourself? Perhaps we're like flatlanders, suddenly confronted with the third dimension, unable to comprehend the true nature of our minds because we're trapped in outdated conceptual frameworks. What remains of the human experience when consciousness itself is revealed as something utterly different from what we imagined? If eliminative materialists are right, knowing too much about ourselves might be the most profound existential challenge of all. Is there something lost when the mystery of mind becomes fully mapped? Or might we discover new kinds of meaning in understanding what we truly are? That is all for this video. Be sure to subscribe. Also, check out my new channel linked below. Thank you for watching. Much love. Cheers.